SWAT box, what are you doing here? This is a combat zone. It's restricted. Ease off on your main thruster and head over to patreon.com/SWOCBC for episodes of our all-new series, Inside the Insider, where the gang explores articles from every single issue of the official Star Wars Insider fan magazine in order and get an even closer look at how Star Wars and its fandom have evolved over the years. New episodes with each public upload months earlier for patrons. Red 24, Red 30, follow me to patreon.com/SWOCBC for the latest episode of SWAT Box, Inside the Insider today. In target range, it's ahead. All ships jump to light speed.
The Star Wars Old Canon Book Club is made possible by contributions on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/SWOCBC for ad-free episodes, reading guides, movie and TV episode audio watch-alongs, and more. Today's Old Canon fact of the day comes from A Guide to the Star Wars Universe, 2nd edition by Bill Slavichek, first published in March of 1994. A Gaiba stick is an edible twig from plants that grow throughout the swamps of Dagobah. The Gaiba plant produces a succulent juice that gathers in sacs on the bark. The sticks can be chewed for flavor and to quench thirst. Yoda, the Jedi Master, was fond of chewing Gaiba sticks. Today's selection is Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, a film by Richard Marquand, first released on May 25th, 1983. Enjoy the show, and may the Force be with you, always.
We don't serve your kind here, but we do welcome all members of the listening public to our podcast audience. Welcome to the SWAT Box, number 1 million. It's again.
Who are you talking to there at the beginning?
Droids. This is
our droid listenership.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's not a lot of droids that just. Put on
Alex
headphones.
might as well be a Gamorrean because of his
well-known
racial hatred.
Species-wide hatred of another species.
Yeah.
It's really weird. And the species is man-made, or I shouldn't even say that. That's probably exclusionary also. Being humanoid-made?
Sentient,
I feel like
organic.
humanoid is also a very weighted
Produced is a good phrase.
We don't know, actually.
Welcome to the Star Wars podcast, where we listen to a bunch of read all the old Star Wars stuff. We're back. All your boys, the Star Wars doughboys are here. We're back with some more stuff. This is the return of the Return of the Jedi episode.
That's
true.
So
now we have watched Return of the Jedi 4K 83. We have read the book. We had our big giant discussion last week about how maybe this set the tone. We love the book so much, even though the movie is kind of a mid-movie in some ways.
I have a question for you about it because I was re-listening to the episode about the book. When you were saying like this gives us like the Zonoverse and all the other stuff going forward, were you talking about the movie and its story, or were you talking about the idea of like slightly like elevated flowery prose on schlocky action?
That's exactly
stuff?
what I'm saying. Like what's the book with where Russell Crowe is the captain? What's that character called?
Oh, Master and Commander.
Yeah,
Far Side of the World.
Fucking Horatio Hornblower.
There it is.
Is his name, right? So like this shit is like not the deepest shit in the world.
Wait, isn't Horatio Hornblower actually the guy that was Mr. Fantastic?
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying. The point is just that that's like it's almost like historical fiction, like something like your dad or your grandpa in his like study with a finger of whiskey would read and imagine that he's like a scholar. But like that's not what scholars read. You know what I mean? That's not like what the scholars are thinking. But they're not reading Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. It's escapist fantasy. It's a simple thing. It's not a layered, deep. It's not reality. It's history.
My grandfather like was obsessed with maritime, everything maritime. Like he was like a lawyer, and then he like owned a bunch of marinas, but he has a collection of maritime art, maritime books. Not one single one of his many, many books was fiction.
Yeah.
It was all like nonfiction accounts of naval battles, naval other stuff. He even had a like 200-year-old book that was the minutes from a court martial of somebody in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So like, that's just saying like scholars wouldn't be like, and then I read fucking Smallville.
Yeah, and so like what I was saying is like, okay, Return of the Jedi, the movie, we all are very familiar with it. We all kind of agree that it's like a 7.5 movie, like in the grand scheme of things, but it's very serviceable for what it needs to do as a movie, and it doesn't create the sort of like feeling that they just like shit the bed and didn't think about it like Rise of Skywalker did. It's just a very good.
It's interesting like watching it again.
It's a capper
because it's like, yeah, it's like the least standalone, and even like Empire, you know, it is a sequel to another thing, but I feel like they like establish and execute on arcs for people in that movie in a way that this is like just kind of about finishing. The book version gives you more of like people's actual arcs textually like closing and doing stuff, but it really is like, oh, how did it end? It ended this way. And there's a lot of like
everybody was happy.
Incredible special effects and stuff, and it added stuff like lightning and like expanded it.
It was more of an event. It was more of an event than like a screenplay led film. Let's put it that way.
It's like a season finale instead of, or a series finale instead of a full movie.
Right. But to go back to the book one last time before I talk about the book, you know, before we talk about this movie for like an hour or two, just to underline my point, what we got from the book version was that flowery language, which, like I said, the thing that I was trying to make a point about was that it was not an intentional play on the part of this guy to like redefine Star Wars. But what happened was, because it was just a simple little him being kind of like, well, I have this. It almost feels like at the World's Fair when like the guy had the waffle stand next to the ice cream stand, and they were like, "What are we gonna? How can people walk with their ice cream?" And we like gave them the cone. Like, it feels like.
Is that how that happened?
Yeah, it feels like. I mean, it's probably like apocrypha. That's like,
it does seem like an apocryphal tale, but here's the thing: most of them are.
Yeah, but the point is just that like when he went out to write this book, he was just like, how the fuck do I adapt this like kind of nothing movie into like a book? And what he came out with was something where you kind of do have to have a high reading level to like read it, because it is like quite verbose language, and kind of in the moment you can kind of pretend that you're reading like Shakespeare about the battle, but you don't really need to have the like context and command of the English language to read like an epic layered
It's kind of
thing.
like when you like watched movies as a kid that were above your reading level, and you just sort of like got what you got, and the other stuff you were just like,
yeah,
okay.
So they found a way to bring. That's what I'm saying. Like they found a way to bring that epicness to us as adults through language. I think via this book by accident, and the thing that the reason I kept coming back to the fact that he wasn't intentional about it was that somehow it's like still very true to the pulpiness and sort of like low investment by the creators of the work. Like oftentimes the people writing the shit are people that are just hired to write it, or they've got a number of books that they need to put out this year, and so they're going to fill in all those things, or the comic book comes out every single month. So it's like that flavor, but heightened. And I just wanted to point out last week that I believe that the novelization of Return of the Jedi, which was excellent at being the novelization of the Return of the Jedi without being anything like a movie.
You think it's more like it happened as a happy accident over like
NJO runs just like this, like years later, or where you just get like a big opera happening on a big scale. You check in scenes like Game of Thrones, where you just get like, okay, here's like
your standing for New Jedi Order is
not
truly beautiful.
It's not standing. It's just that
we're going to go through it.
I just know that you love it, and I hate it so much. And
I don't even know that
it's
I love
fascinating.
It. I just don't know that I love it. That's the whole thing. Like, I'm just saying, like, formally, like from the structure perspective, what that book is, Return of the Jedi. Like, still, it's just like what they just went with for like 15. That's what I'm saying. Like, you're not going to find a lot more like, this book is like just like a book about like, Max Rebo hanging out. Like, you're not going to get like character studies,
like
you're
quiet meditative.
Yeah, you're not going to get like the Old Man and the Sea about a Jedi. You're going to get just a million episodes.
I
of
feel
Jedi.
like that's where the biggest problem with
that's a perfect.
Yeah,
I feel like that's the biggest problem where Star Wars went. Is Star Wars could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And instead they immediately were like, let's talk about their kids now.
Yeah, they were like,
Instead
let's
of
make
we can
20
tell
Return
any
of the
story,
Jedis. Yeah.
it really just turned into it's all about the Skywalkers. And so when they started making more stuff about the Skywalkers, you can't blame them because that's the trajectory they were going on.
Yeah, but the thing that's
They did this themselves.
the reason it works, I think, in the old canon, right, is because the stakes of it are so low. Like, no one who watches the Star Wars movies probably like.
Oh, it's only the super fans that
That's
were
what I
reading
mean.
the books. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So there's not like this feeling how it is with the Marvel movies and stuff today, or the Star Wars movies today, where they're like, we had one opportunity in 5 years to get a story about this character, and you decided to do X, Y, Z with it. You fucks. Like that type of feeling is just not present in these books because there just isn't that much writing.
Let's be
on it.
very clear. A character will die eventually, hilariously, in the goofiest way possible. And no one got mad. It just became a meme.
Yeah.
Like that's where the vibe was at the time.
Because it didn't affect culture,
Right,
and we
right.
kind of all were on the understanding that like if they wanted to, which they fucking did,
it's a book. It was.
yeah, they'll just throw it out.
We'll see what
eventually.
happens. Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question about where my head was at last time.
Yeah. I on re-listening to it, I was like, oh, I think I understand what he's saying. I don't think I understood it in the moment, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So we watched the 4K 83 cut of Return of the Jedi, which I just want to say was, par for the course with these
Looked
reissues.
beautiful.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
The whole rewatch of all these is such a treat.
The colors, the real big noticer for this one, like last time with Empire Strikes Back, it was like an art thing. Like it was like, oh, George Lucas is now not working with like the guys he could afford to make Star Wars. He is now working with the finest like production design teams, the finest whatever to make these movies. And then Return of the Jedi, you got the Empire shots with like the moody lighting on the engines. You got these crazy sort of like almost like proto Rogue One-esque, like kind of like abstract space shots that are really interesting, which to me is like the standout of Rogue One above everything else is those beautiful cinematic shots of stuff flying around in space. But with Return of the Jedi, I feel like the thing that it smacks of to me is like money. Like, for example, the boxes that we've been talking about, like when you see the
They're just
ILM,
not there, yeah.
they're just not in the movie. And we're watching a fucking transfer from the fucking original clip. And obviously it's been, 3.5 years of technology advancing. But Star Wars 3 versus Star Wars 2. Star Wars 2 was like, is it a hit? Is it a thing? Are we... This is our, like, is Star Wars real? And then third one is like, you fucking long 10 years of Star Wars. You guys are getting ready. And it's not even 10 years. It's like 6 years. But you're like, get ready to like get your ass blown off because we didn't make all three of these movies all at the same time. We like adapted to your response each time. And that's the thing that smacked, like Return of the Jedi, very much like Last Crusade is like that too, where the money is just
It feels like a whole other package.
yeah. Like we're still looking at matte paintings. We're still looking at blue screen. We're still looking at puppets.
Like if you know what to look for, you can see it, but it's actually like way less obtrusive than like CG in movies that's like obviously like
Dates it
fake
to
and
like
bad.
a specific era.
Yeah, like the worst effect that I saw was just a shot where you could see the ATs, right? The ATs are Skywalkers.
ATST.
ATST
That's what the
Skywalker.
S stands for.
You're right.
Yeah.
Their foot like clipping through the ground. Like that's
Sure.
the
And the compositions were
like,
unbelievable.
you
The
could, like,
lighting.
tell, yeah, but you could like tell. Aside from those looked the way that they like smoothed out whatever frame rate issues stop motion normally has. I believed it. I believed it in a way that was like crazy. And even the like speeder bike where you can like sort of see there's like a screen behind them, because it's all real footage. The movie just comes across as like they did it. They
and
really made it.
The filminess of it also, like the compositions being analog compositions, it's very much similar to like how audiophiles, even though a CD player can capture higher fidelity, the texture and like cultural legacy of movies has an effect on your sort of like expectations as a viewer. So like if you're old, it's weird to go see a movie that has like no grain or scratches on it at all. Like it really feels weird to watch like those all digital movies like you remember when Peter Jackson put out the like weird like 48 FPS version of The Hobbit?
Yeah,
You see that?
and it just looked weird.
You're just like
watching it play.
Yeah, like it was cool. It was cool as its own like weird thing, but like I did not feel like I was like sitting down to watch the next evolution in the lineage of movies when I watched that. And Return of the Jedi, just by being so handmade, even though it's so expensive, like like the compositions, the especially I don't know how they did the lighting. Like honestly, like Hoth was amazing. Like honestly, like the space battles are always fantastic. The inside of the Death Star in this movie and the fact that they shot on location in America, in California, in the national park, as opposed to like someplace like Tunisia
for Endor.
Yeah, like as opposed to someplace like Tunisia where there's like you don't have to have like union. It's probably like a way more.
I mean, they bent over backwards to be like Star Wars filming here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like it was probably like a much more expensive operation all around to do something like that in the fucking redwood forest. So, like, that to me, that's the impression. Like, if we're going away from like just like the plot of this, which we've discussed to death now by covering it 3 times, like. Just as a cinema piece, that's the thing that this feels like. This one, when you go to a movie theater and it's like flat and you look up at the screen and it's the 70s, or you're like in the woods and you're at a place that only has one screen and it looks like that. To me, this is the equivalent of like going for the first time to like a stadium seating movie theater. This is like the first like in the realm of blockbusters. This is a blockbuster type blockbuster.
There's one thing that I noticed about these that I can't. It's going to be a while before we get there, but. The re-releases. First movie, all the additions, fun. Like they added some fun things. Second movie, just to make the second movie a little bit better. Nothing too crazy. I fundamentally believe after watching this movie that the changes to the third one might be some of the most unnecessary changes that you can make.
It's discordant. It's
things
strange.
are added for almost no reason, just to flex on tech.
The focus, like, okay, like, I always tell this story this one time when I was like 25 or something like that, 26 years old, and I was sitting at my desk. Like old Japanese Super Nintendo style, like,
okay,
sitting at my desk next to my monitor, which was like 3 feet away from me, and I was blazed out of my mind. And I was watching Return of the Jedi, and I was watching the Blu-ray cut that was available at the time. Or whatever. And I was like tripping out. It was like I'd never watched the Jabba's palace sequence before. I was like getting this like total like 80s like sci-fi concept art. There's like tones of like the Hobbit Rankin and Bass cartoon like texture to it. It's very like kind of, it feels like a place. Like my imagination was starting to like run wild and imagine what type of things were happening here. It's like a sweaty den. I was starting to imagine the relationship between each other, and then and all of a sudden I'm like on the Muppets like live ride at Disneyland, and just that, like, it's so different of a place emotionally that it leaves you, like. And it's not like I check out. It's not like if I never saw the movie before and I didn't know that it was from 1983 that I would be like, what? It's very much something that I would expect to see in, especially something like The Phantom Menace, or
so like as jarring as like if the Cerveza crystal moments must have been where you're like, I'm not in this movie anymore. I'm in a different universe for a second.
And your brain kind of just like turns off and it disconnects you. Like, I know that we're just talking about losing immersion, but really, like, it's not just immersion. It's like in a video game or imagination, the immersion is like a lot more up to you. You can kind of like decide what's happening in a video game because you can always like walk a different direction. And, in your imagination, when you're reading a book, your brain can do whatever flips it wants. You're never going to be like, the graphics in this paragraph took me out of it. Right. So when it happens in a movie and you're like, fully in this 80s, late 70s, and then suddenly you're in like the year 1995 for like 2 seconds and you're out. You'd feel like somebody just like,
and it's so aggressive,
took your Matrix shit out. Like the artifice of the movie is floating along on such a narrow thread because everybody has to see the exact same thing.
Right.
So it's like
Yeah, you're like in a usually like a theater where it's your whole vision. There's no commercials during, so you don't have that. It's just like you're all buying in, and then usually because of the budget, it's like reeler and
used to like go to the movies and clap. Like I was watching. I've been talking about this a lot lately, but I watched. Been watching the Halloween movies. So I watched Halloween 1 and then the like old Halloween 1, 1978 or whatever.
Yeah.
Then I watched Halloween 2, which came out like 1 second later and takes place like 1 second later. But before I watched Halloween 2, I went to the special features because it was one of those old Universal Studios Blu-rays that had they made the choice to make them
Made it
all,
a movie maker for some reason.
They made them all look the same, every single one. So I went over to the special features and I was looking at what was there, and there was something called Terror in the Aisles, right? And it's a movie. It's a documentary that's like an hour and 25 minutes long. It feels like something that you would almost put on for a group of kids on a rainy day at school or something in the 90s. But what it is it's Donald Pleasance, who is in the Halloween movies, and Nancy Allen, who is like another like sort
is
of
Donald Pleasance the like
Dr. Loomis.
okay.
Yeah. He's also the best Columbo villain of all time. The one in the wine one. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but that's just a little side. We talk about Columbo on the show sometimes. There you go. But Donald Pleasance and Nancy Allen are like hosting it, and it's like scenes where it's like Donald Pleasance, like, and there's probably like 4 clips of me telling this now online on different shows, but it's like in a theater with like 15 people, but he's being filmed on like a beautiful film camera, and everybody's like, ah, and then he turns to the camera and he's like, did you feel that? That unbridled fear emanating from this group of people who paid good money and popcorn money to come watch a movie tonight? Well, let me tell you about horror cinema. And it has a million clips of a million movies in it, which is like my favorite type of documentary about movies, is where I just get to watch a bunch of clips of movies. But it was explaining horror as like a piece of the larger film genre. And it was talking about anticipation. And it was talking about, because, I mean, you've seen those movies, right? They're not very gory, the original Halloweens. It's like the 70s. You can't do that much. But they're scary as fuck because you're like, they'll spend like 5 minutes with Mike Myers like slowly creeping up to her in the background of shots and first person. And it's really scary. And
They like draw it out in a way that is like good. They're
but
like
yeah, but what this
almost like the kill is finally like the release that you need.
yeah, and this movie is from the exact same year. This
Maybe
documentary
what
is from
Mike Myers was doing.
yeah, he was getting ready
makes
to
you
make
think.
Austin Powers.
Yeah, baby.
Just kidding. But it's from the same year as Return of the Jedi, and it just reminded me of this sort of like connection between that movies don't really have anymore, between it, like the notion that it was going to be on a big ass screen in a room with 150 people in it, change like the pace of the movie, change like the goals of the movie narratively, change like everything. Cue the clip of that weird David Lynch meme of him talking about you haven't watched a movie, you think you watched it, but you didn't watch it on your iPhone. Like there's this communal sort of experience, and like almost like the movie is a pre-recorded live performance in a way where like hold for applause kind of moments happen, and all these things that are like communal occur. And I think Return of the Jedi is that. And I think like,
Oh, very much.
and
so.
I think like putting something like, nah, like the conversation that would occur in a movie theater about that, right, isn't like, wow, that's a crazy alien. Everybody's going to turn to each other in the theater and go, well, that doesn't belong in this movie.
The problem is that during the time period in 96, 97, 98, like that kind of what was luring people to see them was the new things, and they liked the new things. It's kind of like today when you look at how movies are made, it is very different because a lot of directors are taking into account, one, obviously streaming services, but two, movie watching is different, where I don't know when the last time you two boys went to a cinema.
Oh, I go all the time, but
Having watched, when I was in London, I saw a 70 millimeter version of Interstellar.
oh,
It was
fuck
awesome.
yeah.
Totally. I was so thrilled to go to that. However, the entire time next to me were like 4 kids on their phones the entire movie.
Right.
Anytime you see a movie now, there's always at least one dude loudly explaining it to someone else
People
what's happening.
talking, yeah.
And it's like, it's a different experience where people are watching half the movie in the theater.
Yeah.
So they're making movies differently. It's a different vibe entirely. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
Wasn't there a quote from one of the like cinema CEOs about like having to like acknowledge that it's there and not like vilify it and like lean into it in
That's what they're doing. Yeah, that's why things
like,
look different.
Yes.
Oh, I hate that.
Which sucks because it's like that stuff's great in live theater because number one, like it's self-policed a little bit because you can be like, and I've done this a million times, standing on stage and be like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Shut up. You know what I mean? Like you can just do that. But in a movie, like, I don't know, I guess the point that I'm getting at with this is that I think thinking about it through this lens, the tear in the aisles, sort of like we're all together in the theater watching a movie and like when somebody says a line, you might clap. I feel like Return of the Jedi is like a better movie than it is in our little office watching it on a TV from 10 feet away.
Oh, right. Of course.
I think actually like thinking about it through that context, like is the screenplay amazing? No.
I mean, it's very clearly the
I
first.
feel like aside from the screenplay, it's like an 11 across the board.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like a technical achievement.
I mean, it's a spectacle. It might be the very first spectacle movie ever made in like this genre, this space.
Yeah.
Obviously, like the Great Train Robbery, like that exists to be
but it
spectacle.
stands with those movies. It has that grandiose feeling, like Lawrence of Arabia, or even though Lawrence of Arabia is about the
right, but like
content
like David
more,
was saying, and you were saying as well, it's clearly not. People aren't going there to see the amazing script of like, I know there's good in you, Father. Like that's not what people are there to see. People are there to see the 11 out of 11 massive spectacle of an epic space battle and teddy bears that jump kick stormtroopers and shit.
But they also want
to.
They also want to feel kind of like how you feel. Like I'm saying, like kind of how you feel when you're reading about a big battle in World War II. Like you kind of want to feel this sort of like epicness, but you don't want to get people too close to the text because it falls apart. Because like if you're writing about
Sure.
if you're writing about Gettysburg, right? Yeah. There's this real sort of you don't get to decide what happens. Like in Gettysburg, in the Civil War, like more Americans died than like any other conflict we've ever been in. Like Americans, like what was it, like 300,000
We killed a lot of our friends.
Like an insane amount of people died, right? And so like the stakes of a book or a movie. Have you seen Gettysburg, the movie?
I have, yeah.
It's like it's one of those movies that has like a fucking intermission in it.
It is 3 hours long.
Things happen for like accuracy sometimes
Maybe
rather than just emotion. And the notion of adding the emotion to it is like you kind of trying to tell this real story.
I mean, and you're absolutely correct that is a movie. You can tell where they took narrative license to make it a little more dramatic because some of it's just like very rote history.
Yeah, so Star Wars is that, but without the burden of having to like respect the dead, and also without the burden of having there be a real truth to what happened. So you just go in there and you get like the sort of like C-3PO to the Ewoks version of the story. And that's like what we want. Like what we want is to go, but we want to feel like we're in church. We want to feel like we're seeing something epic. Like that's why Lord of the Rings, people always say, oh, that was our Star Wars, because there's not, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of like tapestry to it, but it's not deep thematically.
I mean, even then, the final Lord of the Rings movie, the one that won all the awards, that I think is the best one.
It's a great movie.
Is also just a spectacle. Yeah. It is one
Let's be real,
very
the Two Towers
long.
is the best one, but yeah.
Honestly, I think Fellowship is the best one.
Best extended. I think
Fellowship is awesome.
Best extended, Fellowship of the Ring. Shocking.
Yeah, that's a weird one where now the special editions of those are like,
but they already shot all
they've become the regular to me, and so when you see the shorter one, you're like, oh, he really just like, we're like, I don't know, they'll have to guess this, but Fellowship I think is my favorite because it has like the before, like it's like a vertical slice that has the whole universe.
It explains,
and then by return, you're like, so things are a little dark.
Yeah, I just need to know what happens
and it's
now.
sick, but they also are all one story.
Yeah.
So I don't even like picking a favorite means less because it's like, I don't know. It's like, what's your favorite chapter in a book?
I like the third one because I like tomatoes.
I like the part where the ghosts kind of like wash over everybody.
Yeah. So, but that's exactly what Return of the Jedi is.
I forgot about that part.
Yeah. When
He
it's just-
surfs on an elephant.
Yeah, he slides right on down everything. But that's the point. That's the point. Is like, I think that's the place that Return of the Jedi succeeds, and I think that the fact that we don't consider that part of movie making a lot of the time when we review stuff is kind of funny. But also,
I do think that a large portion of it is just because everything is so digital now and so CG now that it's like when Nolan or one of the few other people are out there like pushing for more physical things, then it's like talked about and it's big. But
Right.
the average person's like, just do it in CG. Like,
but also the average person like does think Disney is like soulless and vapid, and like does sniff out like,
and then
people-
turns on.
Well, they watch
They
it.
watch it all
They
the
watch
time
it. They
anyways.
watch it, but
Yeah.
like the feeling is still there. Everybody knows that there's something about John Wick that's like a little bit more interesting as a movie than the most recent Marvel movie. You know what I mean? Like there's something a little bit more movie-ish about John Wick, and something a little bit more like we all go into a movie theater and
Honestly,
watch content about Marvel.
I think the reason is because John Wick or any other movie where they keep
It's waiting for
or
applause.
a Nolan movie, people know what it is based on its reputation of what. And I think Marvel or big movies, they also know what it is based on its reputation, and it's whatever gets we're gonna hit all audiences.
Close to a major religion.
Yeah, rather than a Wick or like Nolan can produce any movie about any sort of weird topic he wants because people expect it to be
His
like
brand is cinema.
his
brand is cinema.
And same, going back to Wick, like you were just saying, everyone knows what that's going to be. It's going to be about 6 minutes of story and 2 hours of John Wick getting revenge for that 6 minutes.
Yeah, or
And
James
that's-
Bond. Another one that's good is like James Bond,
Yes.
or any horror franchise that's a million.
Exactly.
Like where it's just like, what's the one with the clown that's popping off right now?
It.
No,
I know exactly what you're talking about. The one that has
Terrifier.
Yes,
Terrifier. Terrifier 3. Like you're not going to that movie because you're like into the story necessarily. You're into the movie.
You're going to go see Terrifier
you wanna
in an
go
audience with
feel
people. Yeah.
crazy in a theater, and that's the
Shoot 'em
power.
up. Remember that movie?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It's just like a whatever. Weird that those Clive Owen and Paul Giamatti or whatever, but
Yeah.
it was like, I just like action movies, so you go to like
Or like
see a
Hostel,
schlocky action.
or Hostel's a movie like this where you're like, I want to go in a movie theater.
I wanna
and
be
like,
grossed out.
the
I wanna see some
experience,
crazy shit. Yeah.
Like it's not that you have to be a scholar who's invested in the way the mythology plays out. It's that you get to go see the movie where XYZ happens, which is like, honestly, if we're trying to talk about, and I know Return of the Jedi is like the point of this show, but I want to kind of not drop the sociology part of the show that we talk about too, about how Star Wars evolves. And like, man, like the experience of seeing Star Wars in the theater to me has been the driving force behind the big Christmas time or big May Star Wars event, in the same way that James Bond is kind of an event still when it comes out. But we lost the momentum of Star Wars and we lost the momentum of Marvel simply because that idea of like coming to the theater and getting to see something happen is not really present in those movies in the same way.
Well, because they did a thing that I think was foolish, was let's create as much as we possibly can, create all this content because we're enriching the universe, we're building out the universe more
And
and
there's
more and more.
more demo. There's like, we're nailing specific demos.
Yeah,
a little
we're
harder.
doing this movie about this thing and this thing and this thing, when I think they forgot that these are spectacles, and just in life, you can only see so much spectacle before you become bored of spectacle.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. They just kept making bigger, crazier, and people are like, oh no, this is the formula now, or this is how this works.
The concept needs to be like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For a movie, and like something like that's why for me, like looking at Marvel as an example, what's the one? It's called The Marvels.
Yes.
That movie in the like tapestry of the Marvel movies is kind of a nothing burger because the audience has been trained to expect development.
Right.
Like almost like seeing the movie is like seeing an E3 trailer for like another.
Yeah, what does this create? What happens next
Yeah.
because of this? Right.
And that's, to me, I think what Marvel's like, that's their money.
right.
The Marvel's movie as a concept, if I'm like, okay, you want to see this like crazy action movie where these three, or like, what is it? Three girls are like,
Yeah.
every time they like use their powers, they
They
like
switch.
switch places. Like That to me is much more of a compelling reason to go see a movie, specifically a story told in visuals and theater and artifice in that way, versus like, do I want to read the like comic book adaptation of that story? Fuck no. It's gonna be nothing. But to me, like, the value of that movie is much more cinematic than, say, the value of Endgame, which, yes, it has some cool things in it and it's exciting to see everybody come out of a portal, but there's nothing like, how did they do that? Or like, how are they gonna figure this out?
But that movie had,
they just make up a bunch of rules that don't even keep with that movie's own rules.
but that movie was the
previous one had
pure spectacle
Yeah.
of existing. It was a movie that they were like, we're not going to try and do all this marvelly shit with it. We're going to literally make a spectacle. And the minute you question any of it, it immediately falls apart.
It's just like, it's just
But
like
if you don't, you're like, you get yourself a portal scene. You get to see your Avengers like have like a cool moment. There's a lot of stuff in that movie to love. But yeah, it is Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
It's pure spectacle through and through.
and Return of the Jedi.
Here's the thing, though. Like, I do want to go to bat a little bit. Like, the screenplay, or like, it's not like good in the way that we think about how act structures and stuff should go, but like, it is not a bad ending. Like,
No, not even remotely.
Return of the Jedi? No,
Yeah, I'm saying, like,
it's the only it's like the only ending. Yeah.
the way that it goes is like consistent with the characters and their motivations. I mean, Vader sort of like, I guess it makes a lot more sense with the book. It's a little bit weirder with the movies, but whatever. It like all works. Nobody isn't themselves. Nothing like,
There's not a single surprise.
there's not like plot points where you're like, oh, I have to like ignore that. Endgame, at least for me, you have to just like suspend more disbelief than you should to end it.
But even short of that,
And there's no contracts. Like, there's so much.
Yeah.
We know too much about the Marvel industrial complex and how much it costs to have Robert Downey Jr.
we have notions.
So, like,
we have notions
like,
about
characters don't get the arcs that necessarily the characters should have. They're just like, well, we
Yeah.
gotta kill Tony Stark to just give him a big send off.
But let's take writing out of it. Like, just to like take the actual writing out of it. Just the notion, like Return of the Jedi, right? The reason Return of the Jedi works and Endgame, which is basically just Return of the Jedi, right? Like, the reason it doesn't work as much for me, and I'm not trying to like compare them directly like that. I'm just saying, like, if you look at what's happened for the fucking 40 years since Return of the Jedi, it's been just a bunch of things making their own Return of the Jedi. And Return of the Jedi is like BioShock 1. The first time that, like, can a movie possibly, like, pay off a trilogy and, like, be epic and each one is bigger and better? Like, the only other examples of this are, like...
There's few. There's very few.
That's what I'm saying. There's not a lot of movies where the notion is that eventually it's going to build up to a big thing. And
I think like a thing that makes for this though, that makes the Marvel of it all not really like work as perfectly is like there's like technological leaps between films that, I mean, they made a bunch of money so they could do it more, but like they also, their ability to tell bigger things was unlocked via more tech. By the time you get around to Marvel, you can show whatever you want. So like Infinity War, which came right before it, is not a technological leap at all. It's the same level of fidelity.
Yeah. So the point that I'm kind of
Writing is a lot stronger than the first one.
But also, I think in that case, if I had to be like, what does this movie relate to? Infinity War is an Empire story.
It really is.
It's
a
straight
fuck
up
off.
is just Empire. The bad guy wins, and then Return of the. I mean, if you
look at it as a Thanos movie, you can just have it in there and be like, cool, sweet.
But
the whole
true.
it's a
He
Thanos.
won.
Expanded universe.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like this podcast is like about books for the most part, like readable things, comic books, little novels, novellas, children's stories.
I would argue that's a multimedia.
It is for sure.
Bacchanalia.
But I just want to make sure we're called the book club, right? And so a lot of the stuff that's important about writing a book and the way that you write a book, it's like very much obviously seated fucking in writing and thinking. But with Return of the Jedi, I think it's worth admitting as critics, if that's what we are, it's worth admitting that there is an element of movies as a thing, as a medium, that is like the thing that people say is bad about movies. Like the thing that, oh, it's like dumb, bombastic, like fuck that. That is what movies are. Like, it's 2 hours. You're never going to like engage with the depth of a text the way you're going to engage with like fucking David Foster Wallace with a movie. Like, fuck off, fuck you. Even like Blade Runner or something truly dense like that is nothing compared to the depth and layers that a 750-word novel written by like a singular mind who can go in and like change any part of it at any point and make like a fucking superstructure of their brain on paper. That's just not what movies are about. Right. And I think that we need to Return of the Jedi, to me, even outside of just in the context of Star Wars, is this. It's the birth of like us being like, well, our expectations lead us to believe that this movie should have been better written. So we're saying like, oh, it's like kind of not that great. But like somehow, like if I showed these to like Busby Berkeley or like fucking, what's the guy who jumps off the trains all the time and hits his face in the, you know, the like original stuntman guy.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
He's like not Charlie Chaplin, but he's the other one. The guy who's like standing there and the fucking building falls on him and he's in the window.
Buster Keaton?
Yeah, Buster Keaton. Like you show this shit to them.
Good call.
Yeah, and what they were trying to do, or what's his fucking name? Hugo Méliès, the fucking French guy with the moon, you know, with a fucking rocket hits him in the fucking eye. All these people, like they see that cinema is not just like a easier version of reading.
Well, I mean, cinema is for the masses. I mean, it's how in World War II the Nazis propagandized everyone because they mastered cinema, and it's very easy to get it out because, you know, pictures, 1,000 words, that whole thing. And reading requires you know how to read, and not just know how to read, but understand the reading material and be able to internalize it, which sadly, for much of human history, most people simply can't do.
Yeah. So to judge a movie on whether or not the confluence of like 1 million different disciplines like synchronized together to make like one of the finest single movies ever made and be like, that's a 10. And everything below that is lower than a 10 is like kind of wild. Like it's kind of wild. Like I think like in general movies, like they're a reflection of us and what we want out of them. And I think that what we told Star Wars was to make us Return of the Jedi, and they fucking did it. And I would say, having watched it in this context today, that I would say like as a movie, it's a fucking home run. But as a story, it's like a 6. And I think that's actually like for a movie experience, it's like pretty fucking good. You know, like video games, same thing. Like everybody can talk all day about how adult The Last of Us is or whatever, and how it is the first game.
I hate the controls in that game.
Yeah,
I hate the controls.
But whatever. But you know what I'm saying?
But I'm saying like story wise, as an experience, cool. But
people
as
are
a
saying
game,
people are saying, oh, this is the best story in video game. Finally, a video game with a story, right? Like just uneducated opinions where it's like boss baby type stuff. But like when you've played 1 million video games, look at what you just fucking said. You said, the controls fucking suck. Which, like, if you're like talking about a fucking video game, it's actually worth
it's
bringing up.
When you say control suck, what do you mean?
I mean, one of the things I did not like is they intentionally made it so, in the first one, I have not played the second, when you try to shoot things with Ellie or you're like, because it's supposed to be scary, you're not immediately going to be able to like line up your sight. And there's a lot of parts in the game where I'm like, I just want to shoot, and it drives me crazy.
This is like a thing that I'm going to go to bat for this because I actually think this is them using the medium well. Like,
of course,
you're like a random person and that you don't have like Call of Duty controls. It made the tension in scenes so much better.
Absolutely correct. I know why they did it. It's just I want to be able to like play a game and do it, and that drove me crazy. But it has nothing to do with the story or their intentions or anything. I was just, as a personal thing, I'm like,
it's just a perfect example of how our base requirements as an audience member are not different. Something that, as like, if for something that you're gonna go pay for, right? Like this is very different when we're talking about the works of William Carlos Williams, which are like, I don't know, like a poem. Like, you know, there's a lot more written about a poem than usually what the poem itself is. Like, we're not in that space. We're not trying to like see what you can do with writing and just appreciate it for what it is, because there's a transactional element to it just by nature of what it is. And so like literally you can't escape from the fact that no matter how much you appreciate the fact that this is a really clever thing that they're doing as game designers, the final product left you feeling, hey, I just want to watch this fucking movie and I keep dying. Like I was playing We Sing. Literally one of the most amazing things in video games of the last 5 years. The Alan Wake musical that they did a version of at the Game Awards, but in the game, it's like a ride.
It's a full-on spectacle. Incredible.
People are popping up on screens and pointing the way to go and gesturing at you, the audience member. Amazing. And then right at the end of that,
it's a really incredible
right at the
fight.
end of that
That's really
is
tough.
this fight that, like, I think what you're supposed to do is take the flare gun and just be a dick with it and just kill everyone.
Oh, everyone has to go. Yeah.
But the mechanics of the game, I died like 7 times because I didn't really understand. And it's not. I'm not saying the game is bad for that. I'm certainly
I
not.
died on that spot too.
Yeah.
So I'm just
I'm certainly not saying the game is bad for that. But I am saying that there is no way for me to escape the experience of having had that experience, even though I appreciate and would never count that against Alan Wake as a game. It's just a way of explaining this thing that I'm saying about Return of the Jedi, which is that, like, this had a mission. It set out to achieve that mission based on what we asked it to do for us. And as that, which is what it is, it's a 10, I think.
I agree. I only think that it's like, the weakest one if you have to pick something
from an angle of something, some angle.
But it's still like got some of the greatest moments of the franchise.
Yeah.
It like created, for better and worse, the idea of like, every like epic movie needs to have a 3-tiered final battle where you cut between stuff and do it like it. I mean, Empire did a lot of the like reveal trickery stuff, but also a lot of like the Empire, a lot of that kind of dynamic stuff gets like lampooned and aped and stuff and co-opted.
I think that, going back to what Alex said about how this is the start of actually Star Wars
as a book.
I mean, like, I think in general, just
I think it's the start of actual movies.
It's funny because like the first Star Wars, everybody wanted to like make a Star Wars.
Right.
And so you get like a million Star Warses. And then this capped off the trilogy and then became, everybody wanted not just Star Wars, the first movie, but like, what's their trilogy? And
what's even crazy is the first time it comes back. The return of Star Wars in movies.
Yeah.
At the end of Phantom Menace, it literally is space battle, ground battle, Jedi fight.
Yeah.
Like, it just redid Return of the Jedi. That's what it did to movies. Return of the Jedi is massive, and to deny that would be foolish. It's huge.
The first one ends with like the Star Battle gets its thing. There's a lot going on in Empire, but they're like, and now it's time for Luke and Vader.
It's kind of a mistake that politicians make a lot too, which is like, okay, we are very informed Star Wars watchers, us here sitting on this show about every single thing that ever came out about Star Wars. The context that we have for Return of the Jedi right now is like more than almost anyone.
I think we've watched and read more Return of the Jedi stuff in the last like couple weeks than I think I've ever done my entire life. So I would.
Well, we're still the comics away from.
But we've done
a lot already.
But we've read major media of all this shit. We've read major media of all this, like all the Star Wars that there was before Return of the Jedi came out. We have read it.
Oh yeah, we're like, you couldn't be more informed and more like. We did it not like recently.
So I'm trying to say, like, even though we are smart about this and we have this context and we have all this other intent behind our opinion and all this other feeling behind our opinion, like the average Star Wars watcher probably still would say, even today, as Empire Strikes Back is considered one of the finest films ever made of any type. By most people. It's like, if you pick, it's maybe not going to be in a top 5. It's maybe not going to be in a top 10 if Empire or somebody, or Rolling Stone does best movies ever, or AFI, but it's going to be in the top 25. Dollars to Donuts is going to be in the top 25. I would still guess today that most people's favorite Star Wars movie
Empire
is Return of the Jedi. I think forget about Star Wars fans, forget about anybody with tons of context. Think about like the fathers.
I would say we are stuck in a time bubble there
We're
because
close. We're close.
If you asked most people, like when I taught, I just want to reiterate this story. When I taught, I did an analogy in a slideshow about stormtroopers. And I was like, no, not the ones from Star Wars, because we were talking about World War II.
Right.
And a student in class said, Mr. Cox, those are clone troopers. So I must stress to you, there is a bubble where a lot of people, if you said, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? They'd probably be like, dude, Revenge of the Sith is awesome.
Okay.
Like, that's the best one.
Well,
like,
let's put it this way. Let's just say the cross section of people.
I know, Davis. I'm aware.
The cross section of people listening to this show. Let's say
That's a different choice. Yeah.
So like, you don't have to be a Star Wars expert, and I'm not saying we're overall Star Wars experts, but in 1983 context, we are literally Star Wars experts.
If we were in 83, we would be writing in
We know
the
everything.
Insider.
We know everything. We know everything.
They would not post ours.
We have knowledge of the fan magazine from 10 years in the future. We are crushing this. But the point is just like, in that larger audience of people who are interested in Star Wars, but just not maybe lifers, the fact that we all can kind of agree that Return of the Jedi, even if Empire edges it out because of how famous it is, it's like The Godfather. Like there's something else happening there at that point. It's like The Dark Knight, where people are just like, oh, it's just like one of the best movies. Like it's the computer response, best movie. But like the fact that it's so close kind of makes you think about how I think about movies. Very much like how people were kind of surprised about the election and how deeply ingrained some of the things are that made people vote a different way. It's like, one of the things about the woke liberal experience on the West Coast in one of the biggest cities in the world is that, like, you just don't feel that. You just don't feel that redness.
You're not having conversations with anyone other than people that already agree with
and
you.
So
Sure.
For Star Wars fans and movie critics and stuff like that, like, I think we just don't have these conversations as often. I definitely think that people out there who watch movies definitely know about the spectacle of cinema. I'm not a fucking idiot. I'm just saying, like, in the general sense, especially today in the field of, like, I mean, why are you listening to this Star Wars podcast? Ask yourself. Like, there's probably a little bit more outside the box thinking going on here, I think, on average, than the average Star Wars podcast that's doing much better than ours numbers-wise.
They're listening for Davis. Let's be real.
Hey, he's the bad boy of the show.
I drive above the speed limit.
Damn.
Oh my God.
Sometimes I don't look both ways before crossing the
Okay, Han
intersection.
Solo.
Everything you do is street-based, eh?
Okay, Han Solo.
I don't know. I was trying to think of dangerous
All
things.
street-based crimes.
He's like, if I'm getting chased down an alley, I turn that shit sideways so I can get out of the narrower alley with my girlfriend. Little a Star Wars story humor for you guys. But is it the only a Star Wars story? Is Rogue One also a Star Wars story?
I think it might be a Star Wars story, yes. Because as they were trying to do it, they were going to do the X-Wing one, which would have been so good.
It's a great idea
Like,
for a movie.
is there a great idea there?
It's a great idea
Yes.
for a movie.
Is
Yeah.
the people behind it?
Who knows? I can't.
not anymore.
I'm not going to sit here.
We'll
I'm not
never
going
know.
to sit here and talk shit on Patty Jenkins. I'm just going to say, like,
I wasn't saying bad.
yeah, I'm not going to sit here and talk shit on that. I'm just saying, like, there's this other thing that is at odds with the thing that I think a lot of people come to talk about movies on microphones about and being like, oh, this movie's good. And I just think that people go, oh, it's like a popcorn movie, blah, 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 blah. It's like whatever,
Right.
but it's a 4. But, like, fuck that. Like, Return of the Jedi, reading the fucking good-ass, like, book version that has, like, nothing that's great about the book is in the movie. Almost. First of all. Like, all the things that make the book our favorite book pretty much are not in the movie version of Return of the Jedi. It's like a complete different sort of like embellishment on it, at least for me, that made it stand out compared to, say,
Honestly, like, because those parts were so good, that's what I was looking forward to. And I mean, when we read these, we're always looking for what's different. But like, I don't know that if it had been like more regular, less flowery prose, what that experience would have been, if I would have been as excited about stuff. Like, I might still have been like, oh, my favorite part was like from the movie, but because that stuff was so unexpected and so perfect for what I was looking for, it overshadowed everything. Although, except like still hearing about like the action and stuff that I like is still good, and not having to see the Ewoks helped.
yeah. But like stuff like, okay, like forget about the story. You see Luke the baby. What's that flashing? If you found out that like not even 10 years later, you're going to be like cheering as this man literally like convinces Satan to kill the devil. Like, you know, like, I don't know, like he convinces Goldar to kill Rita Repulsa. Like And he's standing there, he's like, no, you will never. It's like the most epic possible thing, and it delivered it to us.
Yeah.
You know, the mythology of it is intact. Like, we didn't get the, like, and I mean, obviously, of course we did. Like, there's things that happened, like, oh, we need a merchandise. We need to put, like, the teddy bears. But because it's the BioShock, because it's the first one, we don't know about Rapture. We don't know about Would You Kindly. We don't know about any of that stuff. So when we came and we saw this third movie, and it actually...
A man shot lightning from his fingers.
That we didn't know about.
And had no clue the Force could do that. Yeah, that's impressive.
But when you go and you see it and it all resolves, there was a time when instead of it being like, you gotta go see it, Tom Cruise jumps off a fucking building or whatever, it was just a miracle, a novelty that a big, beautiful, expensive third sequel, which never fucking happened, like the third, have you ever seen the third Highlander? Or actually, have you seen that second Highlander?
I was about to say.
Oh, no, yeah. It used to be like they make less and less money, so they're less and less.
But it's like a cynical, we're still making it, we're going to put like the B team on it, whatever. Like, this movie did not do that. This movie leveled up every time. And then Indiana Jones turned around and did the same fucking thing. And then that was it. Like, then that became what movies do. And now every movie that doesn't do that is a failure. And every movie that does do that is the greatest movie ever made. And all the good movies now are just for smart people. You know what I mean? And that's a shame because it's all just right there. You know, as somebody who always gets people take the piss because of what I eat. Like, I like to go to diners. I like to eat. I have lots of like heady opinions about Taco Bell and McDonald's and some old type of bread that they serve at like a specific set of diners. Like, just because the outward perception of that stuff is that it is lowbrow, right? Video games, wrestling, whatever. Just because it's like perception is that it's lowbrow, we don't, it's silly to talk about it. It's silly. We're ignoring half of what makes things great. And I think with Star Wars, the nugget to take away from this, that's like not just like get away from the Skywalkers, which we talk about the sequel trilogy all the time and why it ended up being so divisive and so dramatic of a thing to the fan base. And I think a large part of it is like MAGA and the politics kind of aligning and trying to kind of like get in there on the like critical side on social media.
I guess like
just that changing the,
but
changing
also
the
Disney made it, and how they make movies now, whether you like them or not, is different. It's not like creatively led, it seems, as much. And like,
sure, but it was never natural before to have a conversation about like, are the Asians ruining, like the fact that we let Asians into the cast, is that ruining Star Wars?
Sure. But I'm saying like the movies are like in that were like responses.
Right.
The original trilogy got to be a story where they were like seemingly trying to just do the story right.
Exactly.
And do the characters justice. And that was like kind of it. So no matter what, it kind of like works because everyone's like the best at their craft, all working together, and it kind of like works.
For sure. But each one of the Star Wars movies before this has something amazing in it.
What's interesting, I just looked this up because I wanted to know, but so we have in the 80s, right? In late 70s, 80s, Star Wars. Then we get Indiana Jones, a whole trilogy from start to finish. Everyone's eating up Indiana Jones. And I was like, okay, well, 2001, we got Lord of the Rings, and that became a massive trilogy.
Yep.
And then from that point on, we're producing trilogies.
What's the 90s trilogy?
So I looked it up. I was like, what the hell was going on in the 90s? In the 90s, the
Land
only...
Before Time.
No.
I mean, I wish, but that was 80s. So like...
X-Men,
so
Spider-Man,
in
those
the,
are all,
in the nine, they're all 2000s-ish. So in the 90s, suddenly you have this drop-off of... Everyone's like, where are all the trilogies? We're pumping out trilogies like crazy. The only one available that was a trilogy that people think is critically successful would be Jurassic Park.
Which...
I think the third movie is...
It didn't come out in the 90s even.
Yeah, the third movie is...
The third movie, actually, it's like, they got weaker as they went on.
Yes. Other ones on
and
here...
they continued to be weaker.
And then people don't think of it as a fantastic trilogy today.
Yeah.
They didn't even get they got the cheap actor back for the third one.
Yeah.
And you can see all the things on here, like
Sam Neill's great.
Yeah.
Scream. The Scream trilogy was one. They had the Naked Gun trilogy. None of these are massive critical successes that everyone talks about anymore.
Die Hard.
Even then.
But no, 3 was 2000s.
And it's not even
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
No.
97.
Yeah,
no,
it was
'cause
Die Hard.
Die Hard with a
1,
Vengeance.
You're right. With the Vengeance.
They didn't live
was-
for your Die Hard in the 2000s.
But there was no.
Yeah, you're
nobody
right,
was like-
you're right.
They're
And then
not,
they did one after
they're
that was
not
like-
a trilogy. Just so we're clear, like there's 3 movies.
Right, but it's not a trilogy,
It's not a
right?
trilogy, like-
There's no.
You're
The
not like-
third one, though, they did like.
I mean, it is reference to the first, yeah.
The third one feels like their Return of the Jedi, where they're like, Hans Gruber had a brother, and we're going bigger. We're doing the whole city.
It
Like,
wasn't even a Die Hard movie at first, though. Like they just adapted a script. They just put John McClane in another movie.
is that what happened?
Yeah. Then they were
Whoa.
like, "Oh, that guy."
Which
that's
is why the last half of the movie is so tonally
yeah,
different
That's
than
why
the first
Gruber's.
half.
That's why
Yeah.
Gruber's. He's just Gruber's brother. Like they just put him in.
Yeah.
I don't even-
That's
I
why
think
I like the first half of the
The
movie way
Doki
better.
Doki panicked him.
My point is, it's just another John McClane joint. Like
Right.
how there's like 3 Han Solo
that's
books.
the
Oh,
thing-
it's like another episode.
Yeah, it's
It's
not
with
like
the Austin Powers movies, which were a trilogy during the 90s, which is like, it's just, whatever. The one I will say that I
Zorro?
actually kind of agree with, the Mariachi trilogy.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think actually slaps. And I would
Dude.
go to bat saying that's the 90s trilogy.
But again, didn't capture the imagination of
not
all
even
of us.
remotely. Yeah.
But,
Wait, which one are you talking about?
like Mariachi, Desperado,
and Once Upon a Time in Mexico,
where they have the.
and they do up the ante.
Yeah,
each
and
time.
it's still a
They
continued
do,
story.
but is it a continuous story? I need to rewatch
Yeah,
it because
yeah.
I always thought like El Mariachi was the first one, right? Wasn't it kind of like requeled with
They kind of
Desperado?
like. They kind of like. Yeah, like they kind of like. It's like a video game sequel more than it is like a movie sequel. But again, that's exactly what we're saying. It did not capture the
Right.
world's attention in that way. I would say
But you can see that the companies tried to do it and do it different ways, but it did not work.
the 90s was like
Even
the golden
remotely.
age. The 90s was like kind of weird because it's kind of like a revival of like
They were trying new stuff. We were
like
getting
the big movies in the 90s were like artistically strong, like
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction like set the tone and like
and
like
comic book movies.
It's
and
actually
fantasy
like
was
kind of
shit.
weird
Yeah.
to think about how high concept a lot of
Gladiator,
them.
you know.
But even like what was the one with City of Angels? Like there was like some ones that are like
The Matrix
they were
is
like
a huge one.
Pop,
and
pop
Shawshank
culture ones that were
Redemption.
like if you made that today, I don't think anybody would give a shit about it.
the
Like, it doesn't-
literacy of the movie going audience was so fucking. The 90s is crazy. Like the 90s is a great time for movies in a way. It's just so
Well, you
different.
weren't.
Yeah.
You didn't have anything in your hand. You could barely like HBO. You had to be rich to have HBO.
Yeah.
like you weren't going to movies. Was the like I remember going over to a friend's house to watch the Disney Channel because his parents could afford the Disney Channel, right? And so being able to have that experience where I can go see this movie, it was not just a spectacle, but it was an event. And so people knew that if you're going to go see a movie, it has to be a good ass movie that you're going to hold people. It was a different vibe. It's an entirely different experience in the 90s.
Yeah.
And even in the early 2000s, when again, a reminder, cell phones weren't a huge thing until like
2006. or some
yeah,
shit.
yeah. And it was Apple that blew them up.
The weirdest thing is like we had cell phones for years.
Yeah, and it never was-
before nobody.
Yeah.
My assumption is before like social media took over and like at least according to several screenwriting books, young people go see movies. So like once young people got old enough to go see movies on their own, maybe that's why there's more cell phone usage. But yeah, like for many years we all had phones, and except for like the occasional one that wasn't silenced, it was
And yeah, and the 80s,
you could still
Yeah.
text people there. You just didn't. You just watched the fucking movie.
80s was like the height of like. This is not a direct analogy, but I want to talk about French New Wave for a second.
Okay.
So French New Wave cinema, right? Everybody knows this. Like it's like Jean-Luc Godard, Band of Outsiders, like that kind of like black and white. What's the one that everybody talks about? The main one, Breathless.
Oh, not what I was gonna say at all.
They did a remake of it with Richard Gere, or like 9.5 or whatever that movie's called, or there's a bunch of them.
The sexy one.
There's a bunch. But the reason that French New Wave filmmaking came into existence was because the tradition of French movies was like La Belle et la Bête, like fucking expensive, really slow pace, sort of vapid adaptations of classics, romances, sort of formalized movie making, very big cinema, big budget for France.
Battle of Algiers kind of vibes.
Yeah, but also just like a big ballroom and a bunch of people. And like,
sure, yeah.
And so there was first a magazine, Cahiers du Cinéma, that was like talking shit on that. And all the kids who were going to see movies, because you're right, like there's a social element of going to the movies that's very youthful. Even back then, they got together and like,
and just like you're an adult, fitting in like a bunch of hours to just fuck off is like quite difficult.
So they made a club, basically. They made a place, and they made a magazine, and people bought this magazine because it was a simpler time when actual content was king. And like, you know, it changed. Every director got involved. They would write the fucking reviews of the movies, and then they'd go make movies. You know, the fucking feeling was fucking fire. And so in the 90s, the 80s is the most like the 50s that we've ever been in America, right? Like the 80s was like the 50s again. Like the 80s was like conservatism was big business was like the king of everything.
Greed is good.
It was bleak. It was the most Thatchery we ever were, because Ronald Reagan, I think pound for pound, probably has more blood on his hands and more. And
Coming
more.
out swinging.
I'm just saying, like, he's probably the worst president for America that's ever existed. Like, I think he fucked up so much. And the 80s is that. The 80s is like a bunch of movies that are kind of like, there's still great movies in the 80s, of course. Like there's still, you can think of 15 movies probably that are amazing from the 80s, but far
Oh, you
and
mean Goonies?
yeah, far and away.
The perfect 80s movie?
Yeah. But, or fucking Return of the Jedi, or fucking Back to the Future, or
Return of the Jedi is like
RoboCop.
timeless.
I'm just, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. They're just all, those are the
Goonies,
movies.
pure 80s.
Those are the movies from the 80s.
RoboCop is like a pure 80s movies that's like
Yes.
shitting on the
80s.
80s.
80s
yeah.
had a big emphasis on like family movies. It had a big emphasis on
Don Bluth.
yeah, like just the 80s was a very schmaltzy, sort of like non-exciting time. Of course, there was an indie scene. I'm not ignorant. I'm just saying the characterization of the movies from the 80s is very corporate and kind of boring in general. And then in the 90s, we had this like early to mid 90s like indie explosion in all arts. And I don't know if it was, you know, that thing that people always talk about when conservative administration leaves and then like the bohemians come in and like get inspired and do a bunch of stuff or whatever. I don't really think that's a real thing, but you had things like Quentin Tarantino. You had things like David Fincher, Fight Club, Christopher Nolan's started showing up like towards the end of the 90s. Like there's
You even have like Kevin Smith, like that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Blair Witch Project was in the 90s. Like the 90s was this sort of like refreshment where we still kept the like top tier. There's like the, you know, the Parent Traps of the 90s that were like huge family hits, which we don't really have anymore these days because there's no such thing as a family movie because our kids just like see titties and like watch people have sex all the time. Like it's crazy what like there's just nothing, there's no family values anymore like that. Even though like weirdly Gen Z is also like anti-sex in movies. But the point is just that like there's something about the 90s that breaks it out of that mold a little bit that made, I think the 90s was a very exciting time in movies, and that went all the way to like 2010, like that explosion of quality just kind of stayed for a while. And now we're back to the Bell and the Bed. We're back to like, it's a different costume, but like there's nothing exciting about most of the big movies that come out. They're mostly just remakes or sequels that are like cash-in sequels that have like formal similarities to the originals that are almost like reboots, but they're kind of sequels. And, you know, every once in a while you get a home run. Like I always like to use Top Gun Maverick as a great example of like a movie that hits on all levels just by accident. You know, like I'm not going to say that movie was always going to be a hit because you have so many people's hands on it that, you know, there's an element of luck every time. But
Sure.
But Return of the Jedi kind of sits comfortably in the same sort of boat.
Do you, real talk, this is kind of off topic, but I feel like I have to, it just hit me when you talked about Top Gun Maverick, and I was just thinking about the new Mission Impossible that came out and how much I liked that movie, and how Tom Cruise is doing movies where I'm like, Tom Cruise is like out there.
He
but
understands the very thing I'm saying, yeah.
And I think,
he
do you
also
think it's because he's
is-
from the 80s?
Yeah.
And he has that mentality?
100%.
He like produces everything that he's in, and he
Look at Brad
has
Pitt, too.
loved movies since he's like the most legit movie fan. He loves it. He like knows
It's
every
noticeable.
level
Yeah.
of production and like is into it. So like, I don't think there is a bad Tom Cruise. Like, you might have favorites or other ones, but like, he understands
It's a swing every time.
a bit about it, like enough about movies that like
He's
his
trying to do a
worst
good
one
job.
is like, that's a movie. That is whether you
He's
it
trying to
sings
do a
with you
good
or
job
not.
every time. It's not cynical at all. His dream of success is like everyone in America comes to see this movie because of how good it is. And he does it from time to time. And he understands about the spectacle thing, which I was talking about earlier, which is like, how do you make your movie interesting when every movie looks like Endgame, and it's by jumping off a fucking cliff on a motorcycle?
His spectacle is, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
And people are like, I got it. All right. Yeah, let's
Same
see
thing
what he
with
does.
same thing again. To hate to bring this back, but similar to John Wick, where you're like,
Yeah.
I got to go see this motherfucker whip some ass,
And then
everybody
it
in the theater's like-
delivers. It delivers. Like the last one literally said, we're going to do a Hotline Miami scene, top down, shooting breath of fire shotgun shells.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
It's literally Hotline Miami, like
Delivered
changed-
completely.
yeah.
And I was like, this is awesome.
Did I just rewatch like the first Bourne with you? No, I like rewatched the first Jason Bourne movie recently. And first of all, wow. I mean, I didn't forget. I just
so
re-remembered.
low energy, slow
But-
burn. Yeah,
Yeah, but the fights in that
brutal.
are I like am one of the people that when I watch I like internalize, but when it's all CG, I'm not really like, oh, that every fight scene I was like
brain
flinching
just
a
turns
lot
off,
because
yeah.
it's like real and immaculately sort of like put together. And I think like I don't know, that's just by the time you get to Endgame when you're like everybody's just CG firing things
just
in a big
heads.
brown thing, you're
Yeah.
like none of this like lands with me in a
Emotionally, I'm like, oh, all the friends are here. It's great. But like, I've seen that a million times. Like, it's Return of the Jedi again. Like, we haven't
Purely.
I'm not saying Return of the Jedi is the first thing that ever did this, but they are the first thing that ever did it after multiple movies and like brought together the fan base and paid off. And now everybody believes that is what movies should do. Whereas, like, I don't know. Remember when Kramer versus Kramer was like the number one movie in America? You know, what's that about? Trying to keep your kids?
Sure.
Yeah, like fuck. How rare does that happen now? Like that was used to be like almost every movie, and now an Oppenheimer comes along once in a million years. And let's be honest, WB kind of like
Stole
just
that.
did
Yeah.
some genius marketing. It's almost like Barbie, like got normies interested in a movie that normally would have probably pulled 1/3 the budget that it pulled.
That's again because it
Or
was
profit
memed.
that it
It was
pulled.
the culture surrounding that film. It normally if that didn't have the hype leading up to it, and it wasn't even about people seeing it. Like the movie itself is totally different than I think what anyone expected what Barbie would be.
So good. Great
but
screenplay.
It's fascinating to watch people get excited for it when it's just a Barbie movie,
Right.
which is a weird vibe.
So like, okay, one thing I talk about a lot when I like get into criticism, like, and again, I just want to say this at the top before I get into this next big point I'm going to make. Criticism does not mean say negative things about something. When I say criticism, I'm talking about it in the way that I'm talking about criticism as an academic pursuit, as like the way that books become more interesting 100 years later, just continually trying to interpret and describe the experience of the book or piece or whatever. Just having something new and novel to say is criticism to me. Okay. So when I'm talking about criticism, that's all I'm talking about. People say this thing all the time. We say it all the time on the show, kind of derisively. And I just want to kind of like redeem it and redefine it, which is that Star Wars is for kids. Okay. So people always say Star Wars is for kids, right? I think when they say this, usually it's in the context of like the movie had a bad part in it. And they say, well, Star Wars is for kids. So like, what do you want? Right? Like, I didn't like Sebulba, so Star Wars is for kids. So who cares?
Are you like we probably talked about this like thought terminating cliches?
Sure, but not just that. Like, just
I'm saying that's how I experience it. Is when you're like trying to be critical with somebody about
Yeah.
it, and they have nothing else to say. They just say, well, it's a kid's movie.
Right. And so
as like, well, that's it. I win. I trump you with that.
Right. And as somebody who has all the tools of expression, like I've spent years studying literally how to write English. So my ability to communicate my thoughts in a complex way is very, very good compared to the average person who talks about movies or talks about books or talks about whatever. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying, like, I went to fucking college for English, so I'm just thinking about it on another.
You suck at like HVAC. You could not install an HVAC system.
My
because
hands
you did
are
not
soft.
go to school for that.
My hands are soft.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about shmups,
This is the thing that you trained in.
If you want to talk about fucking wainscoting, I'm not the guy.
If you time traveled back into the Middle Ages and randomly stumbled into a village, they think you were a lord because your hands are so soft.
And I am. But here's the point. There's nothing wrong with whatever impulse within somebody makes them say something so automatic as Star Wars is for kids. You may even genuinely believe that Star Wars is just for kids, which fuck you, but fine. That's so reductive, but okay. But I do believe that most of the time when I get enraged at somebody's opinion and I talk to them for a while, I find that there's much more in common that I have with them than against them. And I think that a large reason why these things happen is because people do not have access to the complete suite of expressing yourself tools that somebody who spends hours a week talking about media into a microphone might, right? So for me, when people say something to me like Star Wars is for kids, usually what I'm taking from that when I'm not angry at them for not understanding that the characters in Star Wars are literary mythological figures and that nothing matters and that it's all artifice, is like they're trying to express the thing that we've been kind of defining this whole episode, which is like this sort of other responsibility to its audience that movies have besides bringing good story or bringing good, any individual discipline to the screen. Is just like that experience in the theater, that like sort of like carefree, sort of like, oh yeah, and
escapism.
It's escapism, but I'm literally talking about
like in a specific
I'm literally
trajectory
talking about
of popcorny
the movie watchers, like the reason people pay to see movies, not the like intellectual stimulation, but the like transactional fun evenings entertainment element of movies. I feel like that type of
it's kind of like you're hiring your own babysitter.
Yes. You're kind of like choosing to say that it's one thing when really it's that you're kind of missing a feeling from when you were a kid. You know what I mean? It's not really that you think Star Wars is for kids, so we should like not look or think any further. You're saying I didn't come to Star Wars in the original, like in my original time with it, because it was stimulating me on an intellectual level. I just want to go and see the bang, bang, boom, booms and have it be good and fun and have us all have a good time together in the theater.
So what is the idea of saying it's for kids?
Yeah. You're kind of like a Star Wars fan who likes Star Wars, and you're kind of trying to explain to someone why their negative opinion of Star Wars
right, you're poo-pooing their negative opinion because you're like, hey, it's
kind of
for
like
kids.
You're trying to respond to it. You're trying to respond to somebody being like, I don't know, like the last Star Wars movie, Rise of Skywalker, it was like so dumb seeing all the fucking every spaceship that's ever been in Star Wars show up at the end. That's so reductive. And then you say something like Star Wars is for kids. But really what you should say is like, yeah, that's true. And I personally enjoyed the movie myself because I love Star Wars so much that like any new Star Wars is good for me. But maybe the thing that you're talking about that we can agree on, maybe the like discussable issue here is that you're looking for something different from Star Wars than I am, right?
So you're saying that there should be more room for nuance in the discussion rather than answering with I disagree with you on this subject, so I'm saying
like how
it's for kids.
How Davis was saying automatic, what was it? Conversation enders, what were you saying?
Oh, thought terminating cliches.
Yeah, thought terminating cliches.
It's basically humans are like really bad at cognitive dissonance, like the frustration you get from two opposing viewpoints. So you just like short circuit that. Like a person that doesn't really like want to engage probably or that says that probably is less interested in convincing you
Yeah.
and more just stopping their
Defending
brain from like
defending
turning and
their-
being
yeah.
like, well, wait a second. And some of it could be like, even if you do really enjoy it, there's a lot of like weird social stuff where people feel guilty about acknowledging that they like it. So even if, like, it would be nice if people that were just like, I don't really give a shit that happened.
Yeah,
Like, they can't necessarily like feel maybe like okay to say that.
I want to believe that the people who say things like that aren't trying to stop you from talking.
So it's this is a terrible analogy, but
Sure.
I think it's like parents getting a babysitter
Yeah.
for the kids.
Yeah.
But really, analytically, that babysitter's for the parents.
They want to go,
They want to go out.
yeah. So like,
But you know, it's for the kids.
so the babysitter it's for the kids.
Right.
And all I'm saying is that ends the conversation. It makes a war. It makes you say, if you disagree with me,
I just got it.
yeah.
Right? Like it's so you can go out.
Yeah,
You-
it's
if
like
you-
it's like for you, not for them.
Yeah, if you disagree with me, now we're enemies.
Right.
Is what basically Star Wars is for kids means. Is like, there's no more talking about this. Like, I like it, you don't, get over it, right? That's kind of what saying something like, it's for kids is. But if you just have the real conversation, I'm just trying to open up, and the point is not agree with my opinion of Return of the Jedi. That's not the point. The point is just that there are many vectors through which you can discuss a film. The stakes are not high. Your way of life is not being threatened when somebody disagrees with you. And sometimes just like kind of like trying to take a crack at articulating your feelings. Like,
Is that why you're always like, make every movie a 7?
yes.
If it's lower, like think about if you think it's a 10, it's probably 7. So like
even
do the work to make it a 7.
you can't talk about a movie that you think is perfect because you're just going to try and defend it. You just have to imagine that every movie is kind of like the same. And I like a 7 because it means there's stuff to like and stuff to like maybe not like in the movie, which is true of every movie. And when you have a movie like Return of the Jedi, right? Okay. And let's say Empire Strikes Back just for this discussion, because I think it's more generally thought of as like an untouchable movie. Like if you have a movie like Empire Strikes Back and you say it's a 10, what the fuck? Like what is the point of talking about this?
I mean, no one will ever like you will always get pushback on a 10. You're not going to find people who agree with you saying Empire's a 10. I know you're going to get a message that's like, no, it's not.
It's just not a balanced position. It's
Right.
just not a balanced
Right.
position. So when you see something that you personally think is a 10, it's healthy to kind of go, okay, well, maybe this isn't so successful. Like maybe right here, like I can see. And the point is not to render judgment. The point is just to think of it as a thing with flaws. And then when something
Like
sucks,
you thinking of it as a 10 means that you've like Horcruxed your own self to it in
Your
a weird
identity,
way that's
yeah.
going to like make you feel threatened
Yeah.
when it does it, and you're going to be like just emancipate yourself from that.
yeah. And then when you walk out of a movie thinking, ooh, that's a 4. Oh, that's a 3. That's one of the worst movies I've seen in years, right? It's really unkind to discourse to then go out and talk shit about this movie everywhere, because you're not really having a discussion about the movie at that point. You're just kind of fighting for your right to be an asshole, to be you're
and
fighting
hoping others agree with you.
Yeah, you're fighting for your right. So
Yeah.
you are then you're trying to make that 4 a 7. You're trying to say, okay, what's the concept? Like, what are they trying to do? You bring it up. And if you approach a movie like that, like Return of the Jedi, which strangely has this sort of opinion around it held by a lot of people, that's like, we all love Return of the Jedi. It's a fantastic film. However, it's very not good compared to the other two, or something like that.
Yeah, that is like
It's
the sort of like
it's
legacy of
missing-
it now.
It's missing something major that the other two don't have. I think that's a fine conclusion to draw.
I
But
also
just because opinions about media aren't absolute, and that you can write a completely opposite one at any time, and that one doesn't invalidate the other, I think sometimes trying to have another conversation about The Empire Strikes Back, where we just talk about how it's the greatest movie ever, or trying to have a 2-hour discussion about Return of the Jedi, where we confirm the notion that yes, this movie is
On
good.
the Star Wars podcast, we love Star Wars is a
It's a
tough
fucking
take, dude.
lame- it's a lame- like, what are we talking about? Yeah. So I think for me, the takeaway from Return of the Jedi and this is just me trying to like make each one of these episodes have its own stuff in it. I think the movie version and watching it in its original form and kind of putting myself back in that theater, I think I want to just say I forgot about that. I forgot that these movies are like these sort of like Broadway shows a lot more than some of the newer movies are, and they're less.
That is such a great example. The last Broadway show I saw was not one of my favorites, but Phantom of the Opera. That is pure spectacle.
That's the Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, that's pure spectacle. I think 90% of that musical is whatever, but like a chandelier falls, and you're like in the sewers, you're doing all sorts of like it is. You're watching it like, damn, this is incredible looking.
If you aspire to be a musical creator, if you want to write musicals, you want to write books, you want to write scripts, there's a sort of rage that can boil up in you at something so base being the thing that everybody loves. You know, Andrew Lloyd Webber is pretty schlocky, cheesy kind of guy,
but nails the aesthetic of like a night out.
And you can be angry that his dumb thing or whatever replaced your genius thing that you didn't even make yet, and you're not even Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's like an OBE, I think, right? He's like a fucking treasure of England, right? Like, you're denying the fact that when it came out, like, the response was that it's still being performed
to this day in the #1 show in the UK right now.
Yeah. And so for me, like, yeah, we can like ignore that. We can ignore that effect that it has, or we can turn and look at it and say, okay, clearly there's something here that is valuable. And even though like maybe, you know, I'm up my own ass too much to like enjoy every movie that way, you know, there's people like, and I almost said his name straight out, and I don't want to like make you think that I have a negative opinion of this guy in general. It's just that like his job is a lot different than mine, and he has a lot different intention with why he says the things that he says. But when you watch something like Kind of Funny, and Greg Miller loves every video game that's ever been made except for fun, like things that he hates because it's funny, you know, like people, you forgot that that's not real. You forgot that like coverage is about being excited, because coverage is about getting people to watch your video about the thing that's coming or the thing that's about to be out. Like, nobody needs to watch a video review of a game to decide to buy it, but by making your video seem valuable, that's something. I personally, from this, you can just tell by my career, I'm much more interested in discussing the text. I'm much more interested in discussing the thing that's before me. And it's not really about whether it's good or bad, but that's not exciting, right? So props to Greg Miller. He's doing something different than what we're doing here. He's doing something different than what we're talking about here, right? And I just chose him because he's kind of a safe example. He's just a safe example. I don't have a vendetta against this man at all.
He does hate the angry video game nerd, though. Alex told me years ago, he said, I have a beef with the nerd.
Actually, weirdly, like, I want to tell you this. Weirdly, I kind of admire the nerd. Like, if we're going to get into this, like, just for a second, and we're going to talk about,
I didn't think we would, but
types of entertainment. Like, do you know who Harvey Picar is?
LJN.
Yeah, okay. Well, do you know who Harvey Picar is?
No.
Do you know who that is?
No.
He's from, he's an independent comic book artist, writer, mostly. He worked with people like R. Crumb. You know who that is? That very, if you're thinking of like a 60s or 70s, like,
I'm not.
Like subversive comic, it's like this kind of black and white style with like knobbly knees and big
Definitely
noses.
before me.
He was like blacklisted. It doesn't matter. You'd recognize his art if you saw it.
Okay.
Harvey Picar wrote a series of comics that became American Splendor, which is like
Interesting.
It's a comic which is like a solo or like very low team member art form, and he's very much what you'd call outsider art. He's very much like not trying to become rich. He's very much trying to just express himself without thinking about where it's going to go. And it's, you know, this kind of like, he created his own rules of narrative. He created his own tone. He boldly forged forward and provided something unintended about the experience of living his life in the way that he did, that gives you this sort of picture of the Midwest and wherever he's from exactly. I don't exactly remember where he's from. I think he's from like Cleveland or something like that. He just gives you this portrait of it, and I think the nerd very much is that, and I think very much that the nerd should be judged much more for something like Selling Out, if he ever did that, compared to something like Star Wars, which, like I'm saying, there's a third heat. There's like a third heat to it, right?
I love that this spawned because I couldn't figure out who you were like. I don't want to say his name. I was like, who is the one person that I can get you with that would be really funny? And you were like, no, let me tell you about the Angry Nintendo Nerd.
Dude, I spend a lot of time thinking about the Angry Nintendo Nerd because Pat, who I do Not So Common podcast with, he was just on Chilluminati. He knows the nerd really well,
right? Sure,
and they're kind of from the same era of YouTube. That kind of, like I said, outsider art. So like, there is art outside of money, right? There is art outside of money. It does have value, and things that do cost money to make should be looked at in that context. It's silly to be higher and mightier than everyone around you when we're talking about Return of the Jedi, which is basically pornography for nerds. You know what I mean?
While we're talking about Return of the Jedi,
so I like Keith Haring is like my favorite artist. He was like a art for the masses. Like,
yeah,
it should be about like
this is another guy.
The
like,
process
if you don't know who that is, you probably have seen his art.
Yeah, like the making of it is as important as, or more important than the product. Like, as an artist, it's very romantic to me. And then maybe he tragically died of AIDS in the 80s or maybe early 90s. But like, I guess maybe a benefit of that is like, even though he was like popular and famous towards the end, he never like sold out. So by the time he died, he gets to be sort of like this, like a
pariah, like a legend.
What do you call it? Where like Jesus, when you die, you become a
martyr.
Yeah, like sort of like the authenticity of art, like martyr,
big time.
Which is like cool. So
big time. But like, okay, the mistake is imagining that Return of the Jedi ever set out to be that and judging it as such.
Oh, right. Being like, well, as like an art house film person, I'm going to like judge it and be like, well, that's not what it.
Yeah.
So to answer is a long way around saying like how we always talk about like, look at what a movie is trying to do and look at it on that level. Again, like Devil Daggers is probably like the first game that like in my adulthood reminded me about like, oh, you like had a very specific idea of what you wanted and you nailed it.
Yeah.
Snake on the Nokia is another like perfect, cannot be improved upon concept. You like did it and you completely nailed it. Is that like a God of War, like huge level PlayStation 5 epic? No, but like moment to moment gameplay, it's just as good or better.
Yeah, exactly.
I also want to bring
God of
this
War.
up today and I've been holding this for weeks to talk to you. It's about Return of the Jedi.
Sure.
And it's about Denis Villeneuve.
Yep. The director of Dune.
The director of Dune.
And Arrival and Blade Runner.
An amazing quote that I read that I thought was fascinating because it's about Star Wars, and I just want to give you the context of the rest of it because it's hilarious to me. But he says, I thought that Star Wars became crystallized in its own mythology, very dogmatic. It seems like a recipe. No more surprises. I'm not dreaming to do a Star Wars. The code is very codified, right? So, and it's this idea of what we've been talking about for a while. But then the funny thing is, and I read that and I said, dude, I kind of agree that I think it's like, it's set in stone. Being a director, I don't know where the fun is in this. And it's kind of just like produced by a company, right? But then the rest of his quote was, I adore Star Wars. The problem is that it all derailed in 1983 with Return of the Jedi. I was 15 years old. My best friend and I wanted to take a cab, go to LA, talk to George Lucas. We were so angry. Still today, the Ewoks turned out to be a comedy for kids. That made me laugh so hard because it just shows you that I thought this man was talking about modern Star Wars.
Yes.
I was like, no, I completely agree, dude. You're totally right.
Yeah.
He was talking about 1980 Star Wars that I love.
Yeah.
Crazy.
He's also 15.
Well, but
I do think like
also he's
not. I do not want to just be like that quote is wrong. I'm laughing like at 15 and his thing about a comedy for kids. I'm kind of like,
You were a kid, dude.
But when you're 15, you don't watch kid shit. Like that's
Right.
when you're like,
You're a
no,
big boy now,
That's
yeah.
not how I go.
But
So
he's
I'm-
also fucking Denis Villeneuve.
He's not wrong.
No, it's not that. It's
I'm
that
just laughing because that I'm like, I also could imagine a 15-year-old being like, that's baby shit.
It's just that critical brain, right? That specific angry guy at Return of the Jedi, maybe was justified in his anger because he eventually went on to elevate like genres of cinema to levels that they haven't been elevated to since maybe ever in cinema. You know what I mean? Like he has gotten more respect for hard sci-fi than, and now like fantasy, and people are dissecting these things as films, like Ridley Scott almost. You know, so maybe I'm not going to poo-poo Denis Villeneuve's understanding of.
I also don't want to poo-poo him. I'm just like the idea of a 15-year-old.
The fact that it was a like 1983 again, it goes to show like I'm with him mentally.
Yeah, but that's exactly how it happens.
Two totally separate. I love Return of the Jedi, and he just had a different experience with it. And I think that's the big takeaway from all of it.
He forgot to make it a 7.
There's like an element of this that I think is important that maybe you guys agree or disagree with. The like idea of possibility is so intoxicating and exciting.
Yeah.
And anytime you end something, you're always going to feel less.
Did I get what I wanted?
Like, yeah, you're going to like, okay, like Empire ends like on a cliffhanger and you're like, I just got a huge revelation. The power of the Force is so much greater that like a thing is that you no longer have the excitement for what's coming next.
Yeah.
And because of that, you like mischaracterize the blame and put it on the movie, maybe in a way where it's like, yeah, you left being less satisfied, or like you got an ending, which is in one way satisfying, but then like, oh, there's not more Star Wars. So like, that's kind of like all your dreams and hopes are now gone.
I mean, how I know that Return of the Jedi is a good movie is because I've seen bad trilogy endings. And the easiest example for me, thinking of what you were just saying about being hyped after the second movie, every one of my friends and I was the most excited. We talked for days and days and days about what we thought the Matrix 3 would be based on the end of Matrix 2. And like, how is that man in the real world? How does this work? We were like, it's a Matrix, then a Matrix. We were so hyped on what it was going to be that the third movie was such a letdown. I was like, I'm pissed about the third movie. And that's how I know what a Return of the Jedi is a success. Because I walked away from that being like, that's everything I wanted. I'm glad we got our ending. Yeah. That was really cool. What a great story. And I loved it as a kid. And having seen a version where you're like, that was nothing that I wanted. Yeah. Like,
and
what was that?
As we learned, there was a small cadre of people like Denis Villeneuve who were looking at Return of the Jedi and having that feeling. And going, oh, fuck. But that's the whole point, is that if Star Wars did do that, it wouldn't have been the hit. Look at The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
The Last Jedi is a thinking person Star Wars movie that has a lot more to say about mythology than it has to say about anything concrete happening in the world. That, to me, was the hugest mistake that you could make after a movie like The Force Awakens, which, even though the fucking feeling across the world was that, like, yeah, it's fine. Like, everybody came to the theater and watched this epic movie because bang, 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 bang. You know, in this other movie, it challenges you. It tells you things that you don't expect to hear. It makes you look at this thing that you have been idolizing and waiting for from another angle. It tells you that the Return of the Jedi is dumb, basically. Like, The Last Jedi tells you that making a movie like The Return of the Jedi, or that being what Star Wars is dumb, right? And I agree that it's dumb on some level, right? Like, the point that the movie is making is not a wild point. It's like, you know, hey, if this was real, there would be a lot more complexity to these types of characters and relationships, right? Like, Luke Skywalker, the hero, would never be a heroic character every day of his life if it was real. Look at The Watchmen, right? But The Watchmen is not like the apex of fucking superheroes. It's not the best. The apex of superheroes is like fucking Age of Apocalypse or Civil War or Infinite Crisis. Just people beating the shit out of each other, because now we're not forsaking the notion of what this stuff is. I personally, as a individual brain inside of a meat body, loved The Last Jedi. I loved it. I think it's a great movie. I think it's probably technically one of the better blockbusters ever made, right? Like, with the level of special effects going on, but just like all the Star Wars movies are that. Even Rise of Skywalker technically is one of the most beautifully made movies ever, right? Like,
it's a weird vibe because I want to love it, but all I see is a glorified space chase.
Yeah.
And I hate that. Because
Right.
it's like, wait, so the movie takes place in the middle of a high-speed chase,
Yeah.
which I...
Well,
It's just a
it's
hard,
a low,
very slow-
It's a high
It's
impulse.
just a premise.
Yes,
it's just
but-
a premise that
Oh,
doesn't immediately
absolutely.
make sense to anyone.
I
Yeah.
completely agree with you on the message of what the movie is, and I think the audacity of them taking out the villain and replacing it with the guy who should have been the villain the entire time. I'm like, I'm here for this. That's brilliant. I love that. But again, I think it's just like, you can tell there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen.
Yeah.
And I just don't like it. And,
Yeah.
and it's upsetting to me. But I will say, out of the three of them, I still think it's the best one.
Props to Ryan Johnson.
I
for
do
like,
think like
yeah.
from a very like a further back standpoint, it is a large issue with it is that it is more cynical than necessarily genuine, and I think maybe that's why a lot of people like why
definitely
Star
genuine.
Wars works is it's a like a tale for all time. Like it's like a very anybody even from a young age can like get it. It's like a genuine thing. It's not the most cerebral, but it's that. And then by the time you get to something like The Last Jedi, which is very like metatextual in its criticisms and thoughts, it's like, so we lost like the adventure. We lost like the thing that we're doing.
It's Empire
which
without,
is like which is what we got here.
it's Empire without Jedi, and Jedi and Rise is Jedi without Empire. There's no coherence to Rise of Skywalker. They just made something to bring everything together. Whereas with Last Jedi, it's just an idea. They didn't think about the fact that they were going to need to make a Star Wars movie of a certain style, and again, I think Ryan Johnson did amazing at like corralling such a large production as Star Wars into something so matching his like other output in tone, quality of like filmmaking. It's pretty amazing that he did that with a movie that costs like $1 billion to make.
It does the thing that Return does with the Force, and that Return shows us new Force stuff, but it's like the dark evil stuff. And you see in that movie that Luke Skywalker's like, this is the good guy version of this, where I'm literally across the galaxy up here. Like, there's cool shit happening in the movie, I think, but I think I understand why it's so divisive. David's absolutely right. There's like a cynical tone to it, where it's like, it's clearly for the Alex. So like,
It's
I'm
the
here
myth.
for the cerebral.
It's not the concrete, mundane events of the story that matter in this movie. It's literally,
It's like the film school punks like take
exactly.
self critical, or what do you call it? Like
and so like, is that a mistake?
No, because it's a choice by a director, so it's not a mistake.
Yeah, is it a mistake? I don't think so. But like, in terms of like,
I do think that that it's the continuation of a saga, that it like is canon. I think like if you were to do a Star Wars movie where the Skywalkers, where those people aren't involved, you could do a much more successful like that version that won't make people respond.
the notion of Star Wars as a mysterious universe where anything can happen and like there's value everywhere died in 1983. Like
I mean, you're not wrong.
Like this,
it all became Skywalkers.
It just became, but that's not what I mean. It just became like so.
I think it's
so undeniable of a aesthetic that like the moment that somebody tried to bring that in, like there's no mystery at all in the prequels. It just answers questions that
like
were already
I
asked.
think that arguably it did end in 83, like you say, but not because of the movie, but because of culture's response to it.
Like,
Yes,
you,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you
yeah.
still
Yeah.
you can't
can
do
do
Bioshock 1
anything
twice.
and you're so free because you're like, it's a brave new universe. There's now like not an emperor, like go forth.
Yeah.
And then it was like,
No, we don't wanna- we don't wanna do
let's
that.
start
Yeah.
making the next thing.
We need the emperor back.
But yeah. So, and then even other things that are like the Old Republic is like so wonderful, but even that is like, well, it's just like the original trilogy, but there's a lot more Jedi and a lot more things. And there's a lot of large ships and stations that do mass destruction.
But it goes to show, like what you were just saying, that all of the things that came out after 1983, they took a lot of risks and a lot of swings. They did a lot of crazy comics, and we get characters that are brand new. We get all sorts of stuff, but it isn't until we get Timothy Zahn, and it's like, here's the continuation right after Return of the Jedi 1 year later. Enjoy. And people are like, oh, this is what I wanted, and
yeah.
it blows up.
Can you be good
It's
at
society.
Can you be good at writing Star Wars without? Can you make good Star Wars without producing something?
The nostalgia of
Can you make it with
what you got before?
Can you make good Star Wars that is not critically acclaimed? Can you? Is there a art of making good Star Wars separate from filmmaking now? I think that's what happened in 1983.
I mean, it's rough because we have modern examples.
Do you
of
mean
what,
like in a mass accepted way?
Yeah, okay.
Because you can do great Star Wars comics.
Like for example,
I mean, Andor is a great version of Star Wars, but
it's something with the Star Wars name on it.
Not a lot of people liked it.
But great is so subjective. So I'm like, with Star Wars, we just like en masse agreed that it was good. So is that what you mean by it, or like?
Yeah, like think about sushi. Okay, sushi comes to America whenever it comes to America, and the notion of eating raw fish is
still weirds a lot of people out. Yeah,
some people don't get it. Some people do get it when they try it, and then eventually, like the second wave of sushi is like, okay, so some actual good sushi chefs are now coming from Japan to like give us some sushi that's like, this is like actually like pretty decent sushi. And then the third wave of sushi is like, now we get sushi, we're over sushi. Now we got to make the sushi that's like, each roll has like teriyaki sauce and mayonnaise and fake crab in it because now
stunt burgers.
Sushi has become integrated into our culture now in the same way that Star Wars is. And so the third movie now, we're not just making like the best sushi that we could possibly make. We're making
the loudest
sushi for everyone.
yeah, loud sushi is the vibe.
Like
sushi for everybody.
Like
teriyaki chicken sushi.
It kind of feels like, a nice place. Well, they have like the craziest rolls, and you're like, or just a regular, like any basic, like a spicy tuna, or like any like simple thing with a fewer ingredients done really well is.
And nobody
better,
nobody who knows about sushi is denying that like the simple omakase, like little rices with the different fish at different temperatures, no one's arguing that that's not true sushi in the same way that nobody's arguing that cinema is bigger than Star Wars, but we can't just pretend like there's not a culture that's been created around the bad sushi.
I mean, there's a lot of sushi restaurants that there's a whole section of the menu that is devoted to
the wacky,
an American palate of, well, all right, I could eat your raw fish plus rice, or I could have like breaded chicken sushi, or like steaks. Like there's rather
than be a dick and live in an imaginary world where none of those people exist because you can.
You cater to them.
Let's just try that fucking sushi and see if it's hitting our standard. So, I don't know. There's something in there about Return of the Jedi. I think Return of the Jedi is this sushi, the fucking teriyaki chicken sushi of Star Wars. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fucking delicious. But, some sushi masters might have a problem. That's all. The
sushi purists.
Yeah, sushi masters, like the old lineage of sushi masters might have a problem with, Wakano's fucking spicy jalapeno,
or the Mexican
mayonnaise.
Restaurant down the street serving a sushi appetizer, which is crazy to me. I was like, what?
Like, what's the point of denying the existence of the thing if you're going to criticize it?
Yeah,
like that's fucking crazy. So, Return of the Jedi. In our scale, I mean, it's dissonance. On the one hand, it's not that good of a movie if you look at every single movie in the world. On the other hand, I don't think there was a great example of a Star Wars movie until Return of the Jedi, kind of.
It's its own thing. Like you cannot.
The complete Star Wars experience was defined by Return of the Jedi.
It had to end it all in one movie.
Yeah, we didn't know where Star Wars was going to end. How?
Right, and with where you are at Empire, for me, I'm like, you could make the story doesn't feel like one movie away from being done. It feels like now there's next level where like Luke is becoming a Jedi and online. Like
I could have watched 6 more movies. Yeah,
like if I'm not even thinking about movies or I'm just thinking about like the story. I'm like, there's plenty more before we should be done with Vader and the Emperor.
And we've read a shitload of it too.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, when it comes to...
And so I think that they have to kind of cram all that down into one thing is like, okay.
When it comes to Return of the Jedi, that exists as well. And I think that's why things that, like Zahn's books and stuff, that's why they took off, is because at the end, there are so many unanswered questions in Star Wars that in the re-release they tried to wrap up an answer when they show you the galaxy.
Yeah.
But in the original, they have a party because they blew up the Death Star and killed the Emperor and Vader's dead. But the Imperial forces still exist. There is an empire. What happens to Luke next? What happens to Leia? And people wanted to know that stuff. And I think maybe that's also why, thinking about it now, that when they tried to do like, here's what's happening elsewhere, or like the continued adventures of Lando, people didn't care because they're like, what's Luke doing? There's a galaxy that you haven't answered any questions to.
Like, it's definitely cooler that there's books about Lando, like from a like hipster standpoint,
Yeah,
like
but-
mine, where I am a culture fucking vulture, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh yeah, Lando's fucking such a sick character, but not in the court of public opinion compared to Luke. You know
And
what
I
mean?
think that's also why the Force Awakens was a cultural event too, and people went to go see it because it was. I did want to know what happened to all these
they want
characters.
to compare. They want to see. Yeah, exactly.
And that's why the next two are totally different audience experiences because people saw, like, I caught up. And so now you're done with caught up. Now you're like, make something good that I like. And that's why you have different opinions from that point on.
Yeah, and
Because they got caught up.
The Last Jedi was the optimistic movie that Star Wars was going to keep going forever, and then Rise of Skywalker was like, we might be destroying this franchise. We need to make Return of the Jedi again, end this, and then we'll pivot and figure it out. And JJ, are you busy? Tomorrow, we need you. We got this knife. Anyway, the point is, it can't be too complex. It can't be too simple. It can't be too
I mean, but that's the problem with
reverent. It can't be too silly.
I mean, that's the problem with Rise of Skywalker is it's too complex.
Yeah.
There's so many things happening in that movie that you can't have the Return of the Jedi experience because there's 3 movies happening in that one movie. It's
Yeah.
wild.
But let's be honest that the
I would
Return of the
argue,
Jedi
like-
experience is the thing everybody's trying to compare it to.
Sure.
Rise of Skywalker is complex, not in
A good way.
Memento. It's busy.
Yeah.
It's convoluted.
overly
it's convoluted.
crowded.
It's convoluted.
Yeah.
Because
yeah,
they twisted their story that was going in a complete other direction back around on itself in a very unnatural way.
yeah, you need to like make it all make sense, and it didn't. Some other interesting stuff I didn't.
It's not a recognizable
know
myth.
until
Sure.
recently though about the movie. Who did I see that was potential directors? So one
David
of them,
Lynch?
David Lynch. I didn't know that, or Cronenberg. What's his face?
Yeah, David Cronenberg.
Is it also David? 2 Davids?
Michael Cronenberg? No, David Cronenberg.
I don't know which Cronenberg.
The father, the Fly. Yeah.
Yeah, it is David Cronenberg and Steven Spielberg. Like they were all considered. I knew that Steven Spielberg was considered for episode 1. I did not realize, especially because reading the interview with him for when Last Crusade was coming out, he talked to, like, they asked him about the idea of it, but he wasn't like, I was asked for this. Like,
He said, there was a time when I was ready to do it, and that time is not right now, and I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and then he went on to go
say-
make his like
okay, I thought he was
biopic
like,
things.
I love them as a fan, but like, I don't get to like, that's like George's baby. I don't get to like do the things that I want to do
He
with the
did
movie.
bring up that there was another time where maybe he would have said yes, but that he was like, now it's Indy's my thing.
Okay, but this is in 83, so
Yeah, exactly.
that could have been. Anyways. And then David Cronenberg, who I just think of as like,
The Fly.
what else did he do that I know? Like,
Just a million like fucked up movies. What's the one with the dude exploding on the cover? Fuck.
What?
Scanners, isn't that him?
yeah,
Oh, his head
Scanners,
explodes,
Videodrome, The Dead Zone, The Fly,
Yeah.
like Existence, like he did. I just think of, I'm like, the idea of a Cronenbergian Star Wars is fascinating to me.
He went with Lynch and Cronenberg, right? Lynch just made Eraserhead. Like, what are you? And he was like, because that's what he did. Because you know why? Is because that's what he did with Empire. He went to Kirshner, and Kirshner is like another like artsy dude, and Kasdan same thing, artsy dude. So he brought Kasdan along to do the other thing, but then Marquand, I don't even think he's a real like. I
So
don't.
Marquand is sick because like I was like, who the hell is this guy? He did like small thrillers. Like he saw his World War II thriller about like a German spy trying to like escape with information from a thing that does not sound at all like an epic thing. He just liked that, and so he got him on board, which is like
Probably
legit. I don't know.
Wants, probably nobody wanted the fucking pressure. To be honest, like if it was me, I would never say yes to making Return of the Jedi only.
Sure, it's just really like interesting, and even I mean, I don't like J.J. Abrams, so I'm like, but the point is not.
He's a 7.
The point about that is not that, but like getting Rian Johnson like is an inspired choice.
It's the
like,
same exact play.
It's so interesting when they take like risks on things. I do think that when you're like a big company like Disney, and we've seen with the MCU, you're not really getting a full-on movie from those people in the same way.
If they'd gotten Villeneuve,
yeah. So I don't know. We got it. We got Dune from him, and those films hit me as an adult, like Star Wars hits me as a kid. I'm just like, my mind is aflame.
Mm-hmm. I would say a lot of kids in the 70s were like, "This is hitting me exactly like Dune." Also, so that's like a nice little synchronicity. Anything else we want to talk about Return of the Jedi? I feel like we still have to talk about it one more time at some point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like we did talk about a lot of the stuff during the other stuff, and like
we've gone
during
through
the watch along
twice.
It's just like I don't know. There's so many different for us talking about how it's like maybe not the best one. Like still, the Jabba's palace scene is like a perfect. The pacing is like perfect by today's standards. It's still great.
It's a better movie than
so
the rest of the movie.
Imaginative. They like pulled off. It's crazy that they pulled that off, and then also the Ewoks in the same movie again. But and then the like scale of the battles and the stuff in the ships is like also still kind of unmatched.
It's
still
unbelievable
when they're flying by and it's like fly casual. It feels that
massive,
big.
yeah.
They did it.
The trench run in that movie, I thought a lot more of it was special edition.
No, it looks
than was
incredible.
I couldn't believe the fucking part where the thing falls, the generator falls on itself, looks exactly how I thought. I thought that I was watching that shot in the theaters in 1997 and going, or 1999 or whatever it was, and going like, wow, they really made this look way more amazing.
No, it collapses in on itself and like
does
it
the
looks
whole
really
thing.
cool. Yeah.
I did notice, and tell me if I'm wrong, the Emperor did not hit the side, right?
No, he falls straight down.
So what's up with that?
I think they probably added that.
But it's in the book.
But it's in the book, right?
It's weird. It's weird.
Maybe they couldn't obviously make it happen in the movie, and then
It might have
for the
looked
re-release
weird.
he added it because he could then.
So weird that would be important to him, but that's fine.
I mean, again, that's why we have the
When you're making a special edition, like the selling point is the new things.
It's also worth mentioning that those movies we were like, that's a dumb thing to put in the movie. These are for movies these are for people that have seen these movies already. That's the other thing about the special edition. Not just that it's the new stuff. It's like you've already you don't need to be like fed the information that this movie is going to feed you in a normal pace because Return of the Jedi is one of the most seen films ever made.
Yeah.
So you're good. We're there to relive it and be like, oh, yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. I think it's funny the anger towards the special edition sometimes from not us. I mean, we're kind of grossed out by it in a low key way.
I mean, I think
yeah.
the anger for it, a lot of it is because they kept redoing it. So there's the George Lucas special editions, and then there's the 8 other versions of the special, and then the Disney version of
They
special
really just
editions.
need a fucking original version.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
It's
that's
fucking
the problem.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's like for a while. I don't know if people remember this, but for a while, you go into a Best Buy every Christmas, and there'd be a brand new edition of Star Wars.
Yeah.
I used to think, and I still like the idea that you needed to try and tie the other movies into this is ridiculous. Like they can tie in because you're using the same characters. You already like with the prequels kind of screw that whole lineage up, but like to have shots of like prequel planets and their stuff just doesn't make sense to me at all. Like people should just be able to know that like a thing is its own thing and it's separate.
Pure
but then I
fan
also
service.
read an article about how from somebody that like reading Wicked really changed the way that they watched the original Wizard of Oz and
Cool.
changed their motivations. And I like face palmed and I was like,
Wizard of Oz is a book too, right?
What?
Wizard of Oz is also quite a popular series of books without Wicked.
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
I'm not roasting you. I'm just
No.
Yeah.
Like, but the idea, like, they're also not written by the same person. They're
Right.
like 100 years apart almost. One is like a fan fiction. Like,
I
they're not created at all to be
Truly did
connected.
not, yeah.
And just like the idea that I always assume like, no, people will get it whenever like you couldn't have like Batman on Smallville or like on the small screen because they're like, well, having 2 live action will confuse people. I'm like, no, they're not dumb. But like maybe people are confused by things. And so I don't know. I don't like that. I think it doesn't fit it, but maybe somebody needed it to have Return of the Jedi hit every movie.
We simply must always remember with manufactured art, that's not just like a painting that some guy handed you off the street, that like it
Did that happen to you?
Yeah. A guy, a homeless guy used to think that this place that used to be an art gallery many years ago that was not anymore outside of my house, like still was, and would sleep out there and like come to my front door and knock on my door at 10 p.m. and try and sell me his like psycho art that was just like poster boards that he got from Office Depot, and he taped magazine pages to them and they did not look good and there was not enough effort put in. But that's, you know what? Let's not go there. The point is just that like anything besides that, or like Harvey Picar or anything like that, that's outsider art, right? Comic books. People are like, why did they change this character? Why did they change this artist? It's like the answer is in front of you.
Money.
Yeah. Dumbass. It's a fucking business. Like, it's not like they could just do anything and they just chose this. It's like fucking Steven Spielberg said no. So we're getting the Richard Marquand version, you dumbass. Like, let's just think about that. There's no time when Return of the Jedi was going to get made where it was just a piece of creativity. That's stupid. We have to learn how these things are made and the context in which they're made to fully read them. Simple as that. Simple as that. They need to be contextualized a little bit more. Like, as we go forward, like right now, I feel like we've been doing a kind of neat job about giving enough context for the books that we've been doing for the most part. I think as we go forward and people are alive who made this shit, there's going to be a lot more, like, I want to learn about how they did lore, for example, in the Del Rey books, like 90s era. Like, I want to know what the team was like compared to now. I would love to see, like, what their version of Pablo Hidalgo was or whatever. Like, I'm so interested in all that shit too. So there as much as I think Return of the
Who
Jedi
their
is
tomes was.
Yeah, and
little Final Fantasy 16 reference for you guys. I am so into that game.
Yeah, I just think like Return of the Jedi is kind of a nice reminder of that, and the way that it has a sort of diminished reputation from the other movies. It's worth considering those types of things, and the more you know about those types of things, the more on the side of any movie you're going to get.
I also think at its core, there's you can critique Return of the Jedi, but there's also a little bit of that cultural thing where like someone who's popular in the zeitgeist at the moment says a thing like, I don't like Return of the Jedi, and then other people just repeat it because that dude said it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a lot of the case here, especially with like, there's a lot of things in general in life. Suddenly it's cool to hate things.
We're social creatures that like mimic each other.
Yeah.
We ape each other literally. And so, yeah, people just are like, moist. That's a gross word. Liars.
It's like, you didn't care about that 5 years ago. Suddenly you don't like that. Like,
Yeah. I never heard that until there was a meme about it.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's the legacy of Return of the Jedi, is like the money feeling, the full, like this is the corporate Star Wars. This is like the first fully profit driven piece of the Star Wars machine, kind of.
It's crazy because
it's less of an experiment than any of the other ones.
Yeah, it's weird because up until that point, almost you can think of like the countless examples of.
Oh wait, I'm like the Death Star again.
Yeah,
it's this, but again, but worse.
Yeah,
You're right.
Yeah. But in Hollywood in general, during that time period, even before, it was like very heavily driven by profits, but they were just really good at hiding it. In because it wasn't like Hollywood was a fantasy world.
They didn't make money like this before.
Well,
that's
also,
what I'm saying, yeah.
but also, just making a really good product that sold a bunch is a good like.
In general, more care was given to things in a more earnest way at that time because there was less capitalism than now.
Sure.
That's just, unfortunately, like another thing about Star Wars that we're going to learn as we go is that like as less and less rich people exist, right? Because they eat each other, like itch.io or whatever that fucking shit is. Or no, what is it called? The fucking thing where you eat each other. Like
What?
That game where you like are a worm and everybody's worm is on the same thing. Remember, it was like really popular like 2 or 3 years ago. And you like you absorb the other
Genital jousting.
basically, sort of.
They tried to perfect, or they tried to enhance Snake, and they just couldn't. Because that game is
perfect. It's perfect.
But that's the point. The point is like, at that point, there was so many more rich people that could pay for stuff. I know that it sucks already that there's like this imbalance between rich people and poor people. Hard to eliminate completely. Let's just say a couple of countries have tried, and it hasn't worked out the best. But the divide right now is so great, and the concentration of the money is so much that there's really not that many opinions controlling shit. You know, we just watched a major movie studio basically shit itself to death for like 4 years with Warner Brothers, for the most part, just in the public sphere over and over again. Everybody knows the name of the person they're mad at. Everybody who works on every movie tells you this guy fucked our shit up. And it's because he's like some rich guy, and there's no checks on him. There's no checks on him from anywhere because every single piece of the process is owned by one business. Nobody's going to go out of line in that way anymore. Whereas, you know, to make special effects happen in the 80s, you probably had to get together so many different interests compared to now.
I mean, that's the difference between spending $50 million on a movie and $200 million.
Yeah.
The guy giving you $200 million is going to want a lot more power and control.
Also, $250 million is worth less than it was
when
it was $100 million. And so you know, there's this sort of notion in art that we just don't care anymore and that like people are dumber and stuff. But really, it's like, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense why corporate art, like I could still write a poem that's I think is beautiful, and I could post it online, and like 90% of the people that see it will think, oh, look at this edgelord being sad and an emo or whatever, loser. But, you know, it will connect with a few people, and those people will remember it. And even today, like I don't make very permanent content, you know, with regard to like the type of thing that I make. Like most people who listen to it on the day it came out or shortly thereafter, unless you're a very dedicated fan, right? But like even today, whenever somebody comes up to me and tells me like, oh, this was important to me, the way you said this, or like this moment was so beautiful in your piece. Like I remember there was like a stupid backstory talking about the nerd again, right? Going back to my show, The Decks, it was about Pokemon. There was like a lore situation with the characters that we played in the show, like as many people did back then, where they'd say, oh, like my gaming YouTuber persona is like a character in a fantasy world. And like obviously nobody cared about that on the global sense about my thing. You were actually in it. You were the voice of the villain in it. And back in the day. And we had to like say goodbye to ourselves and all this stuff. And, you know, it had some real emotion and stuff in it. And even though it's like so cheesy and so lame and like not the point of it, but like those things still happen. Those moments still happen. There's not a reason not to try and do a good job when you're making shit when it's time to make it, right? Like obviously fuck your boss if they don't treat you right. Obviously, you know, we're about to live in a world right now where we're going to be so mad at the people in charge for so long. And, you know, we're going to get it. It's going to be a test of like what really matters to people, you know, and what stuff really motivates people to do things. And art is always so interesting because it seems superfluous in almost every discussion about it. Like when we talk about politics, like it's so hard to like come and talk on a microphone like the day after a horrible election night, you know, like to come back and be funny and be silly and carefree. It's like really hard to do those types of things. But you know, everything is made of art. Every logo is art. Like sentences technically are art when you write them, period. Regardless, like the branding of a thing is art. You know, it all matters. It all matters, and it's not superfluous, and it has an effect on our mindset. So yeah, I don't know. I think trying to boil it down to whether something's good or bad is really not as helpful or definitive or worth getting angry over as it is. And Return of the Jedi is that feeling of, yeah, I know it's shitty-ish. I know it's not the best, but I love it. I don't know that it's between Return of the Jedi and the Egg McMuffin, the sausage McMuffin with egg. Those are the two things that I think are like so just perfectly not that great, but also so great because of
The difference is that like the sausage McMuffin is not made with the greatest ingredients. Like that is made with cheap ingredients. It's missing the
context matters because you have to make 4 million of them in one day. You know what I mean? Like it's totally like, can you do great ingredients at that scale? Absolutely not.
But the ingredients of Return of the Jedi minus the screenplay are like
minus the screenplay.
But not any one ingredient in the sausage McMuffin is like the greatest of its era.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, yes.
It's delicious. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's got like its appeal, but why it's not quite the same as Return of the Jedi is like,
well, one's a breakfast
Return of
sandwich.
the Jedi is like
one's
10, 10, 10,
one's
10
a breakfast
screenplay,
sandwich,
6.
and one is a movie.
But also, McDonald's is one of, if not the biggest fast food chain in the world. And that kind of equates to having the
Star
biggest
Wars.
star power
Star
you
Wars
could
is the
have.
biggest fast food
and
chain
your
for your
production
brain,
can
yeah.
still be an Egg McMuffin.
Yeah.
Even if you're the most wealthy in the world. Like,
Yeah. Like means of production is definitely not the analogy.
it's a good analogy when there's this much like, I'm talking up here, so I'm like, if you think about it from a certain point of
It's
view.
it's the end
like
product.
Star Wars.
It's the end product. It's the user experience of the Egg McMuffin and the user experience. It's not about making it. It's about the user experience of it. It's like we as a whole group.
I agree with that.
We as a whole group feel
It's not like the same as the movie. It's the experience for the person is like,
yeah. It's not that it was made in the same way or that it exists for the same reason. It's that we as a people feel the same kind of like knowing it's not perfect love for it. And I think it's worth celebrating that and really digging into why we feel that way about Return of the Jedi is worth more than talking about how nice Jabba looks again. He does look nice. He looks great. He's one of the best puppets ever made. The Sarlacc pit was very scary without the
every
tentacles.
background actor, I give you all the salute and love.
Yeah.
Because that is a great scene.
Yeah, the Ewoks are, divisive. Those little fuckers were acting their hearts out.
Some incredible facial work
Yeah.
on those puppets.
Yeah.
It's neat.
actually, the Ewoks, like what you're talking about, like watching the special editions and where you're like watching the movie and then like there's a CG sliced noodles where in your brain like short circuits. I wonder if like the Ewoks are like that, but in the actual movie where you're like, what
Yeah.
is happening right now?
There was no like cutie guys. There was no like cartoony
Now
guys.
back to the good. Oh, we're back here.
Yeah, but honestly, like, I don't know. Like, it works for me. It just does. I don't know. The tone of Return of the Jedi, yeah, I don't know. Egg McMuffin, sausage McMuffin.
It works because like it's always been there for me, but I could see like the first one, it's hard to tell like what dialogue and what era is natural or not because we're not from there. But like the dialogue for me in A New Hope is a little bit wooden.
Tatooinean.
You're right. Empire is like, all right. It's like whip smart written.
It's got good dialogue,
It's like I bet if you're like watching that, you're like, see, this nerd stuff is not like it's cool. It's
got
sick.
the funniest
and then you go see that and you're
prose, yeah.
like, okay.
I mean, but it's also very okay. I love Return of the Jedi. I will, on watching it, if I'm just by myself, fast forward through every on Endor scene because I just think those scenes compared to the rest of it, I'm like, whatever.
But the
I
first
still
time-
love that movie.
And the first time was hype. The first time you watched
Because
it.
I had no idea what was happening. But now I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, really their story is a bunch of like furry guys and then they blow up a shield.
story's
I don't
not
need
the
to
strength.
watch
Yeah,
this
the
bit.
story is not the
I'm going to
strength.
go
Yeah.
back to the space fight.
Exactly.
And it's fine. Like it's absolutely fine to love a thing and not love all of it. It's
You're
acceptable.
alone in your little freak room where you can be crazy and do
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Enjoy
you know?
it. Who cares?
I can take my sausage McMuffin with egg and I can smear Coleman's mustard on one side of the bread and it can be elevated to a level that you've never even thought about with the sausage
Man's
McMuffin.
out of control.
I'm not going to tell
Stop him.
anybody. I'm not going to tell
Call the
somebody.
police.
I'm not going to tell somebody, yo, you're stupid. You don't even understand the sausage McMuffin if you don't put Coleman's mustard on it because I would be a fucking asshole if I did that. But that's what we're all doing with Return of the Jedi, kind of.
sure.
So that's kind of the point. I'm not defending it. I already liked it.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to put my fingers in the hole and spread it open so that we can look at it
Yeah.
and just kind of understand why we feel this way about it a little bit more. Does that make sense?
What's going on in that hole?
Yeah. How doctorly of
Luke
you.
is figuring out his way to the light side.
What's he wearing?
It's black, all black. slimming black.
Nice.
And one glove like Michael Jackson.
But it kind of like folds it back. to show the duality of.
That's a Star Wars. The collars of Star Wars shirts have been going under the radar until the Chandrillans on Andor. I didn't realize that was like a Star Wars thing, but like it's there. Anyway, that's all for today. If you guys want to continue to listen to this, if this is the one that finally got you hooked in an emotional way, head over to patreon.com/SWOCBC. Over there is actually us watching the movie straight through, and you can watch along with us if you get the 4K 83 cut. I will put some sort of direction towards.
If you really need direct commentary, if you're like, I gotta know what to think of this scene,
yeah,
it'll
probably work pretty well with any version of the movie if you kind of stop and start it as you need sometimes, I think. But if you can get the 4K 83, that's the one we watch because it's the only one similar to the originals until Disney.
You can search for it online.
Or maybe you just have the VHSs, like most of us do.
Most of us are not our age. We are quite a lot older than most people with our jobs and who listen even to podcasts at this point, really.
What?
Yeah, about Star Wars especially. But I love that there's people our age listening to this.
Light
and I love that. I want to.
I'm going to go towards it.
I want to shout out. I want to shout out to the old people. I want to shout out to the people that are older than me that listen to this show. Thank you for taking what a young person has to say seriously compared to you. Like, it's so hard to do that. It's so fucking hard to like listen to somebody who is not as quote unquote wise as you talk about something. And I just appreciate that we're all here and that there's no vitriol at all. We have been, 20 episodes in?
Yeah.
Have you seen anywhere as the webmaster?
Every day.
I mean, there's a dark place that I shield you guys from, but no.
Is there? No, I don't think there is, right?
I don't know.
I haven't, in the way that I was just completely ass-rammed with negativity from the last show, because I was talking about something that was still coming out.
You need to fall in line, Alex.
I'm just saying, just by doing it this way and doing something for people that want to think about it this way and kind of taking us out of the like political element of it a little bit, of it being something that's coming in the headlines every time, I feel like we've hit a good rhythm, and I just want to shout out to anybody who's stuck.
We
with
also
us
left
and
the front line.
Yeah, and who's thinking about, but that's what I'm saying, like there is no front line. That's the whole point. Like this is not politics. This is fucking made up shit that is like fun only in the ways that it can enrich our real lives, right?
Well, you know what? There's an increasing amount of fiction in politics these days.
It's weird.
We got him.
It's weird to think about, but actually the truth is that it's less fiction that is more effective.
It's why the like expanded point of view line from the Empire book is like nails.
Yeah.
It's like people just pick what they decide is real or not, and then they just go all in on
They
that.
really, literally do. So thank you guys so much for listening. Also, in addition to the movie commentary, there's also Inside the Insider number 9.
What?
If you like that show, which is now out on the public feed, the first 3 are like, I think, 2 episodes or 3 episodes back from right now. You can go listen to the first couple of those. If you like that, there's an entire archive of those. Anytime we put out something where we're covering a text or a movie or something like that, anytime we review something on the show, there will be an Inside the Insider that goes along with it. And the further we go, the more ahead we will get on those. So it's an ever-widening gyre of value, you guys. So
Gyre?
Yeah, a widening gyre of value.
Gyro of values.
A ever-widening gyro of value.
Welcome to the circus of values.
A
Just bring it back
delicious
to Bioshock.
Turkish kebab made with real meat. Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you guys for listening. And I'm trying to remember what bit I did at the beginning. Oh, you know what?
You attack
You
the
droids?
audience.
You droids? You can come on in. I'm fine now. I've changed my mind. I've let down my guard. Me, the Gamorrean, Gran Torino has happened.
Right.
I met with a little droid boy on my street, and he taught me some stuff about,
And then some other droids.
He gave me some
killed you,
oil. He gave me some
unfortunately.
oil that I drank. Yeah, and I went down to some other pigs.
Yeah.
You tell me that you need liquids too, just like humans, and I'm missing out on an entire like sector by not serving you.
Oh, C-3PO, I love you so.
I love when Rolf comes into Star Wars.
Yeah.
Do you remember that at the end of Gran Torino, after he fucking dies, the next thing that happens is the credits roll and Clint Eastwood sings a fucking song to the audience over the credits?
No, I don't remember that. But let me tell you this. There's another thing that I encountered recently that very similar. Guys, pick up Alien Infestation on the DS.
Okay.
And when you roll credits, you are going to get a treat that's
a real A to like R jump that you're asking people to make.
Same.
Okay, well,
One of those memes where they're two whatever singing end credit song. You're like, okay.
yeah, love that. I remember when Paul McCartney did that in Destiny. Look up that video.
Did he sit?
Yeah.
I thought he just wrote a piece.
No, there's a hologram of Paul McCartney that pops up. We are the future. Something like that. I don't remember exactly. I love you guys. Thanks for watching.
What
this
just
is the
happened?
Star Wars Old Canon Book Club. Here comes the droid. Goodbye.
The Star Wars Old Canon Book Club is made possible by contributions from our listeners at patreon.com/SWOCBC. Thank you for your support. This month's Patreon Masters of the Force are Sovereign, Ian Berenade, Tripper Isom, Patrick Rowland, Matt Wars 56, Amy W., Jazz Owl, Peacetime Mando, and Metroid Mike. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with a discussion about our next selection, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Hop of Sharu, a novel by L. Neil Smith. This episode was edited by Alex Del Campo and Alex Fasciani. The theme song is Venus, the Bringer of Peace by Gustav Holst, performed by the U.S. Air Force Heritage of America Band. Original show art by Jackie Whistler. See you next time.